The Prophecy Club, a nationwide television program, a nationwide radio program. The Prophecy Club also hosts approximately 40 major city meetings per month. Our mission is to inform Christians of current events that confirm Bible prophecy, expose the evil devices of Satan, warn believers what is coming to America, challenge people to stop sinning and turn to Jesus with all their heart, and to provide a platform for Christian speakers to be heard.
It's a bald-faced lie.
Using our positions of power and authority in our own government.
The greatest oil field in the world is at the southwest end of the Dead Sea. He said, son, you must warn this nation.
And now your host for the Prophecy Club, Stan Johnson.
Welcome to the Prophecy Club, where we study and research Bible prophecy. Today's topic is a final warning, a history of the New World Order. Now, why in the world do we need to know about that? Well, Genesis 3:1 says, now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field. So we know that the devil comes very subtly. And a lot of times he attacks, and it's real easy not to notice the attack. You just see things falling apart. Revelation 13:1 and Daniel 7:23 both say we're coming to a world government. Revelation 13:1 says, and I stood upon the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns. I believe that that is 7 continents, the 7 continents of the earth, that they've divided up into 10 global regions. Each region has a leader, and upon his head is written the name of blasphemy. Daniel 7:23 says, the 4th beast shall be the 4th kingdom upon the earth. In other words, the world government. That's what it's talking about. Which shall be diverse from all kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, again, world government, and shall tread it down and break it in pieces. The Bible says that unless Jesus would return, no flesh would be saved. So we know that it's going to get that bad. And in introducing our speaker today, there was a recent movie that a lot of people just saw as just simple entertainment. But a lot of times what comes out of Hollywood is truth based upon fiction. Sometimes there's truth based upon fact. And in the movie The Matrix, Morpheus, a character, said, the Matrix is everywhere. It is all around us. Even now, it is in this very room. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth. Your speaker today says that this is an example of what is actually going on in the world today in regard to the influence that has been exerted by the New World Order to manipulate and to control your speaker says that we are not living in a real world, but in a matrix created by the God, little g, of this world. He's going to be talking about how our society as a whole was created and is created and controlled, how it is, and how education was hijacked and manipulated, how the media affects our day-to-day world, how news organizations control what we know, who is behind the influences and effects of TV, economy being manipulated, forcing both father and mother to work, weakening families, trickery that brought about the Federal Reserve, how income taxes were forced on us, mindset of the Social Security and social programs, how politics changed this country, and a whole lot more. Will you help me welcome our speaker, David Rivera.
Hi, my name is David Rivera, and the talk basically that I will be doing this morning will be coming from the book that I wrote, Final Warning, A History of the New World Order. And I guess the experience by virtue of me being up here comes from the fact that I've researched it for 25 years. Back in 1978, I heard a gentleman going around the country talking about the Illuminati, and needless to say, at that time I didn't believe a word that he said, but after a couple years of doing research, I discovered about 90% of what he said was pretty much true. And so I've been researching since then, and I think I've put together things in a way that you can understand it a little bit better. I've come from a different angle and a different perspective, I believe, that gives a more deeper understanding to the subject. The reason why I use the Matrix, and it's really strange because a couple years ago, I guess actually more than a couple years ago, back in 95 when the movie came out, shortly before then, the pastor of our church had preached a sermon that he felt like the men in the church should be getting rid of their action movies and not be going to watch R-rated movies. And needless to say, I went home that day and started going through all my movies, and I had a pile here, and you would look at it, oh, I shouldn't have that, and look at this, oh, maybe I can keep that. And so basically all the men stopped going to the action movies, the R-rated movies, and then we had a minister shortly after that, a guest speaker. He came in and started talking about The Matrix, which was an R-rated movie. And I wasn't going to go see it, and the people in the church were very excited about what he was saying because he was given a spiritual application to the movie, which I still was sort of blinded to seeing because I was just convinced, no, we can't be going to R-rated movie. You can't allow ourselves to be deceived to think that we could get some good out of a movie. And so I didn't rent it, and my wife had actually rented it a couple of times, and I wouldn't watch it. And so when it came on TV a few years after that, that is actually the first time that I actually sat down and watched it. I was just completely blown away by it. And as most of you probably know, it's a science fiction action movie made by Warner Brothers, and it is R-rated. And it's a secular movie, but and you shouldn't really confuse it with the two sequels that just came out the past year. The two sequels are just, it's junk. They sort of got away with the whole concept that they started out with. But the very first one is one, if you haven't seen it, you need to go out and rent it. One of the, early in the movie when the character Neo goes and speaks to Morpheus at the Lafayette Hotel, he sits him down and he says this to him: do you want to know what it is? The Matrix is everywhere. It is all around us. Even now in this very room, you can see it when you look out your window or when you turn on your television. You can feel it when you go to work, when you go to church, when you pay your taxes. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth. And when I heard that paragraph, it just blew me away because there was so much truth wrapped up in that small paragraph. And so when we started when I started thinking about the concept of putting a presentation for this video, I really felt that that would be a good launching point because just the whole concept of the movie itself really kind of explains how I think we're living in the world today that's run by an elite that we have no idea what's going on behind the scenes. And one of the things that really blew me away was on the internet I found the actual original script for the movie itself. And in the original script, they talk about the Matrix being a euphemism for the government. They talk about the Matrix being a system controlling our lives. And they talk about, in reference to Big Brother and the New World Order. And so they've taken that out of the movie because they didn't want any of that kind of political overtones to the movie and didn't want it to appear conspiratorial. And the concept basically is the character Thomas Anderson, who is a.k.a. Neo, because he's a computer hacker, played by Keanu Reeves. The movie opens up and he's in his own world, doing his own thing and stuff like that. But what he's actually doing, he's actually laying comatose in a pod where his mind, images fed into his mind to make him believe he's in a real world, yet he's actually feeding a civilization of machines that are actually running the world. So that's the basic concept. And Morpheus tells him later on, after all this is revealed to him, that what is the Matrix? It's control. The Matrix is a computer-generated dream world built to keep us under control in order to change a human being into this. And we've been referred to in the writings of the Club of Rome as useless eaters. And we're made to service the world for the people that run the world. In our lives right now, we go out day in and day out, we work, we go to church, we do different things, and we don't think about the things that are actually being done, how the government is and we get a little bit of inkling because of us going to war in Iraq, so we can sort of see the way things are manipulated to get our country to do things like we haven't found weapons of mass destruction yet. We went there because of that reason. So there's a kind of a small idea of the things that are done to manipulate us into being able to do things. But there's many, many things like this that are done behind the scenes that we don't know about because we're busy. There's so many things that are dominating our lives And even though technology is supposed to make our lives easier and better, the technology has made us want to do more, and we're so consumed with living our lives, we can't really pay attention to the things that are going on behind the scenes. The Illuminati itself is, I believe, the organization that is fueling the New World Order, and though they are not called the Illuminati today, we go back to that as the roots of where this organization started, and the man who is highlighted as starting it is a man named Adam Weishaupt. He was a Jesuit priest and a professor of law in Germany, and he was the man that was handpicked by the Rothschilds to lead and develop the Illuminati. Rothschilds being the most powerful family in the world, and you don't really hear a lot about them, but over in Europe you do hear more about them than you do here. He was very much involved in the occult, studied the philosophies of the Manichaeans, astrology, medicine, magic, the Egyptian occult practices, and various other occult-oriented things, and he was rumored to be a Satanist. I found this on the internet. I thought it was very interesting. It is his family crest, and it's really interesting that his family crest had a black goat's head on it. Now, I had kind of trouble. You'll see there's some lines there because I had trouble. The place that I got this from didn't want me to download it, so I had to download it in pieces. But a black goat's head obviously is a satanic symbol, so you can more or less see where the family line is oriented from. The organization itself is launched in May 1st, 1776, and was known as the Ancient Illuminated Seers of Bavaria, and became known as the Order of the Illuminati. And the name was derived from the Luciferian teachings of being holders of the light. And the name of Lucifer itself means the bearer of light. By 1783, it kind of got a slow start, had about 600 members. One of the gentlemen that got involved with it was a man named Baron Franz Nigg. And he was a lawyer and basically was an organizational genius, and he got them all kind of a single aim and a single goal, kind of got them together where they could more or less concentrate on things, do more recruiting to get the kind of people they needed to do the things they wanted for their goals. He later quit because of Adam Weishaupt was basically not running it the way he felt it should run, and one wanted to keep it secret, one wanted to keep it open, so there was kind of a division there. And on top of that, a gentleman by the name of Joseph Utzschneider, a lawyer, and 3 other professors at the college in Germany there, went to the Duke to inform them about what the Illuminati was doing. And the list of goals that he gave to them as far as what they were doing, and which was pretty astounding for how old the organization actually was at that time. And these 6 things that was given to the government was the abolition of the monarchy and all ordered government, abolition of private property, abolition of inheritance, abolition of patriotism, abolition of the family, through the abolition of marriage, all morality, and the institution of communal education for children, and the abolition of all religion. And that sort of goes along with the statement from the Matrix, and where the goals are, they sort of coincided. So I'm going to use kind of both of them as a premise to go into my talk. At the Third Masonic Congress in Frankfurt, the Illuminati goals were stated as pantheism, which is the worship of many gods for the higher degrees, and atheism for the lower degrees and the populace, and the communism of goods, women, and general concerns. And so what people down here are thinking and seeing are not what the people up here are thinking and seeing. And they're interested in the destruction of the church and all forms of Christianity, the removal of all existing human governments to make way for a universal republic in which the utopian ideas of a complete liberty from existing social, moral, and religious restraint, absolute equality, and social fraternity should reign. And the statement made by Morpheus, well, obviously this statement he said in the movie was written by the Wachowski brothers. And like I said, that exactly coincides with the 6 goals, and exactly coincides with the goals that have been fermented since since the 1776 when we started. The symbol that you see there is the symbol of the Illuminati, and it's also the astronomical symbol for the sun, and it's also used in literature by proofreaders as where commas need to be placed in manuscripts, and it's also a mathematical symbol for a circle. But being that it's the astronomical symbol for the sun, it was used by the Illuminati as part of their secret code. And I don't know, in the course of my research, I've read a lot of books, and there was a book a few years ago written by a very well-known Christian minister who had this symbol on the top of his book. it struck me as being very strange, and I actually called the publisher to ask why this symbol was put on the book, and the publisher assured me that everyone there was committed Christians, and that it was just an oversight, that it was what they call a dingbat. But whether it was a dingbat or not, I don't know, but when you get familiar with the symbols, when you get familiar with names of people, you start to notice things, and I sort of had something in the back of my mind about this book when I seen that symbol there. Of course, it could always be done by somebody who trying to make somebody look bad, so there's always that case there. But if you ever see this symbol anywhere, you know, it's the symbol of the Illuminati. The first statement that I want to isolate as far as what Morpheus says in the movie is, you can feel it when you go to church. And I'm going to sort of move into levels here, and I'll start moving very quickly once I get warmed up. But you've heard the Illuminati conspiracy has been referred to by many names. It's referred to as the Master Conspiracy. It's referred to as a Jewish conspiracy. It's referred to as a Anglo-Saxon conspiracy. I think first and foremost what we have to focus on, it is a satanic conspiracy, plain and simple. Ezekiel 28:12-18 talks about Lucifer and his beginnings and how he was the anointed cherub upon the holy mountain of God. A lot of people don't ascribe to the theory or the thought and the mindset of there being people on the earth before Adam. And I do. It fits together with a lot of things that are in the Bible and the time scheme of things. And I believe that there were people on. Jeremiah 4:23-26 alludes to people being on the earth, and also various language within Genesis, in the very beginning of Genesis, alludes to people being on the earth before Adam. And I believe that Satan was the ruler of the earth at that time, and it was pride that caused him to want to exalt his throne above God, and because of that he fell, and his fall made the world as a wilderness. And I believe it did some things as far as this world, where the world had to be recreated and refurbished. And Revelations 12:4 talks about a third of the angels being involved in a war going against God. And there's actually geological evidence that points to a lot of catastrophic things that happened prior to our recorded history. And as a result of that, Satan is cast out of heaven. And of course, before that, he was Lucifer. After he was cast out, became known as Satan. Luke 10:18 says, Jesus said, I beheld Satan as lightning fall from heaven. When we have Adam and Eve being brought on the earth, Adam and Eve was given domination of the earth. And this really upset Satan, because he felt he was still the head of the earth, that this was still his kingdom. And so it was his job in his mind, he needed to get back the earth. So that's why he deceived both of them in order so he could stay and keep control of the earth. 2 Corinthians 4:4, Satan is called the god, little g, of this world. And to accomplish that, he will do nothing but steal, kill, and destroy. One of the things that an example I like to use in what Satan is doing today, and you can sort of correlate it with, I'm sure you've seen movies where somebody goes in to rob a bank and they kill somebody and they got hostages in the bank, and you got 100 police out there, guns drawn, cars circling everything, and that man inside there who's done it has nothing to lose. So he's gonna do whatever he wants to. He's gonna kill people left and right, because he has nothing to lose. And that's what Satan is doing right now. He has nothing to lose. He knows the word better than most Christians, and he knows what his end is going to be. So what he's going to do is take as many people with him on the way to his end. And like I said, he does nothing but kill, steal, and destroy. It's like a monster movie. He does nothing but kill, steal, and destroy. And to do that, he lies, he deceives, and he manipulates. And I think what this presentation will do will give you a good idea and a good overview and the big picture of how this is happening. Religion was the first area that used to pull people away from God. Nimrod, in the Bible, he established the mystery religion in Babylon. At that time, people there were all of one tongue, were able to communicate as one people, and Nimrod built the Tower of Babel to reach unto heaven. And when God saw the intent and what was in their hearts, and the extent of the idolatry and how people were pulled away from God, he destroyed the tower and confounded their speech. And Genesis 10:25 says that this happened in the days of Peleg, which I sort of calculated that to be 2248 to 2009 BC. And it was at that time that the earth was divided. And at that point, after the separation of the people, I believe the ocean levels were risen at that time to basically have a physical separation for people to pull them away from each other. After the death of Nimrod, his wife/mother Semiramis proclaimed him to be a god, and he became known as a sun god, and he was called Baal. And the sun god is nothing more than a representation of Satan. We alluded before as how Satan fell as lightning from the sky, and so there is the representation of light in regards to Satan. The sun god worship spread throughout the world in the form of Apollo, Bel, Mithra, Jupiter, Marduk, Osiris, Ra, Helios, and in different societies, different cultures. Deuteronomy 4:19, Moses warned of sun worship, and he says, "Unless thou lift up thine eyes unto heaven, and when thou seest the sun and the moon and the stars, even all the host of heaven, shouldest be driven to worship them and serve them." So he gave a warning at that time, and there's really a lot of things in the Bible that are given as warnings that we need to heed today. The Old Testament talks about putting marks on your body, and the reason for that, because in Revelation there's the mark of the beast. So if you don't put any marks on your body, you don't have to worry about getting a mark. It's really interesting that when idolatry has always been a sticking point to the people of Israel, and they were given the Ark of the Covenant in order to have something to focus on, because they were always being pulled away by idolatry and having something physical to look at and something physical to worship. And it's really interesting. You can look at the plagues of Exodus, and when you look at that in the context of what God actually did, I mean, yeah, he came against the Egyptians, but he also did something in the spirit realm to the Egyptians. And if you look at the one plague as far as the animals, and he was coming against Hathor, the goddess of love, birth, and death, depicted as a cow or a woman with the head of a cow, and Apis, which is the god of fertility, who is represented by a bull. And the plague of boils that came against Ketesh, the goddess of love and beauty. And the fiery hail came against Tefnut, the goddess of moisture and clouds, and Set, the god of storms and disorder. Locusts coming against Osiris, also known as the god of earth, vegetation, agriculture, and death. And darkness was coming against Horus, the god of sky and light, and Ra, the sun god. The death of the firstborn was coming against Anubis, the god of death. And it's really, Ten Commandments is one of my favorite movies, and it's really, at the end when he sits down and he says, his God is God. And they knew that our God, the God that we worship, is more powerful than any god, any demon, and Satan himself. So we, as Christians, we have the authority and we have the power to come against any representation of Satan and any direct attack from Satan. Exodus 23:4, thou shalt have no other gods before me. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water underneath the earth. He also says, Leviticus 26:30, I will destroy your high places, I will cut down your images and cast your carcasses upon the carcasses of your idols, and my soul shall abhor you. And it was idolatry that led Moses, it was the idolatry while Moses was on the Mount of Sinai getting the Ten Commandments that led to the Israelites wandering around for 40 years. So God takes the idea of idolatry very seriously. Also, the 70-year captivity in Babylon was as a result of idolatry, and that's how God basically rewarded, they reaped what they sowed. And even today, as a sidelight, we have, it's not only the worshiping of idols and stuff like that, where there's also idols we can have in our own lives, that we get involved in things, we put more of a focus on that than we do the Lord. So there are many other ways that we can have idols in our life that often need to be addressed as Christians. We can see how the worship of the sun god began to permeate the cultures at that time, and how by the 4th century the sun god worship was coming into the church. The coin of Constantine, who was basically the first pope, you can see where the rays of the sun are coming out of his head here, and we can see it as far as the obelisk in St. Peter's in Rome. And at the birthplace of Jesus, we can see a representation of the sun there on not the birthplace of Jesus, but the traditionally recognized place of the birth of Jesus. And in the Pope and the thing he carries there, we can see the starburst. And we can also see in various pictures we see pictures of Jesus and Mary. We always see halos, actually representation of the sun and sun worship. we start going up later, and we see the Druids, and the Druids I always felt were almost like a satanic corruption of the wise men, and they were prevalent among the Celts in 3rd century BC, considered very evil, sacrificed human sacrifice, animal sacrifice, had many powers, worshipped the sun and moon and the stars, did human sacrifice, and basically were people that you wanted to stay away from. Witchcraft is a kind of a direct descendant of witchcraft, and witchcraft is a polytheistic, nature-based religion. They worship many different gods. They worship a mother goddess, which is the moon, which is invoked through different names, the most popular being Diana, and we can actually trace all these things back to the original mystery religion in Babylon, whereas Semiramis is noted as the Queen of Heaven. What the people in the occult try to do is to say that because their religion is older than Christianity, that it is not Christianity. They say that their gods were in existence before Christianity. And they claim that they don't believe in Satan, yet they worship a horned god known as the god of fertility, animals, woods, and death, and is associated with the sun. And the Druids also worshipped Samhain, which is the horned hunter of the night, and the god of the dead, which is actually a representation of Satan. Like I said, Druidism and witchcraft were birthed in the mystery religion of Babylon and represent Satanism because of the various gods and goddesses that they worship are actually demons, and their power comes from Satan. And there have been many people that have come out of witchcraft that said that, you know, once they got deeper and deeper into it, they began to realize the dark side, and they realized that they actually had to get into the satanic aspects in order to get the power that they wanted. Leads us into Freemasonry. Freemasonry has a long and illustrious history. You can sort of go back to the Order of the Knights Templar, which was established in the 12th century. They were basically organized to protect the pilgrims who were going to the Holy Lands. And they were actually housed in a wing in the royal palace in the Temple Mount. And it was later discovered, years later, that they were actually excavating under the mount. At the time they found the Dead Sea Scrolls, they also found a copper scroll at Qumran that indicated the existence of 64 treasures around the Jerusalem area that were hidden away from the Romans when the Romans were coming in. And 24 of these locations are actually underneath the mount. And it is believed that there was quite a bit of money that was found to be in these locations, and that's what the Knights of Templar were digging for. And it's rumored, it's been written, it can't be proven that this was founded by the Knights, and this has become the foundation for the wealth of the international bankers. By the end of the 12th century, there was about 30,000 of these Knights, and they became so much of a threat to the royalty that they were accused of trying to overthrow the government, worshiping Satan, and they were arrested and tortured and killed in England, Italy, and France. So this was, I believe, basically the birth of the Freemasonry. Most of the Knights who wanted to escape from the persecution they were getting took refuge in Scotland and began developing the Masonic order. In England, it's the First Lodge of York became known as the York Rite, and in France it became identified as the Scottish Rite. The Masonic tradition is based on King Solomon and the Jewish temple, and in reality the name Solomon is not the Solomon from the Bible that we know. It is actually a representation of the sun in Latin, Indian, and Egyptian, Solomon. So it's not King Solomon. And that's where the confusion comes from people who get involved in the Masonry. They think they're getting involved in a Christian organization, not a Christian organization. Story is told about Master Mason Hiram Abiff of Tyre, who helped build the temple, and he was killed by 3 fellow crafts because he wouldn't reveal the secret Masonic word. And according to Masonic writers, Abiff represents a popular Syrian god and an Egyptian god and the pagan sun gods. At the Congress of Williamsbad in 1781, there was a meeting of many secret organizations from all over Europe, and at that time there was many secret organizations, and they really didn't have common leaders, common goals, and it was at this point that they sort of began to get organized together, and it was at this time that the Illuminati and the Masons merged. Freemasonry, and the reason why I bring it up at this part of the talk, is Freemasonry is a religion. Joseph Newton says that it is a worship in which all good men may unite. And Albert Mackey, who is a Masonic writer, says it is a religious institution. And J.D. Buck says that Masonry is the universal religion only because and so long as it embraces all religions. Albert Pike writes, every Masonic lodge is a temple of religion. And as far as what kind of religion is, it's really known as a fraternity and kind of a place for guys to hang out. And they equate Jesus as just being a man and equal to Muhammad, Krishna, the Hindu god. And the name of Jesus is not allowed to be mentioned in the lodge at all. Chase's Digest of Masonic Law says that Masonry has nothing to do whatever with the Bible, is not founded upon the Bible. At the end of the initiation for the Royal Arch degree, the lost name of God is whispered, which is Jebulon, which is a composite of the names of the sun gods from 3 religions, Jah, the Syrian form of Jehovah, El, which is Baal, and On, the Egyptian sun god. Albert Pike, a lawyer, was the head of the Scottish Rite Masonry, very intelligent guy, was fluent in like 16 different languages, was involved in the Confederate side of the war. He coordinated the Illuminati activities in this country, and he said in 1889, the Masonic religion should be, by all of us initiates of the high degrees, maintain the purity of the Luciferian doctrine. Yes, Lucifer is God. And Albert Weishaupt said, behold our secret. In order to destroy all Christianity, all religion, we have pretended to have the sole true religion, and to deliver one day the human race from all religion. The Anglican, Lutheran, Southern Baptist, Presbyterian, Roman Catholic leadership have all come out against Freemasonry. And I've heard people talk about how they get mostly down south where they're in churches where the leadership fights against doing evangelistic things to help the church grow, to bring salvation to people like that. And there's been a lot of Masonic influence in the church itself. If you're in a church that's not growing and doesn't seem like it wants to grow, there's a good possibility you might have some Masonic influence in the church. The Masonic order has been used to weaken Christianity in this country. We can see, since we've gone through the evolution of going through Druidism and through witchcraft and Freemasonry, we can see a convergence of the many influences with the different Bible versions. Of course, the one that we ascribe to at the Prophets Club is the King James Version that was translated in 1611. And since then, and actually more recently, in the couple hundred years, there have been many, many different versions of the Bible that have come out. After using the same Bible for 274 years, there's been 36 major translations in the last 119 years. An August 2000 survey, which is the latest survey I could find, there was a survey of 518 Protestant pastors done by Ellison Research. 34% used the NIV, 24% used King James, 17% used the New Revised Standard, 10% used New King James, and 9% used New American Standard. It is the charismatic churches, the spirit-filled churches, basically they're overwhelmingly in favor of the King James Version because the King James Version is truth. Hebrews 9:10 says, which stood only in meats and drinks, in divers washings and carnal ordinances imposed on them until the time of the Reformation. The TNIV version, the new version that just came out, says, they are only a matter of food and drink and various ceremonial washings, external regulations applying until the time of the new order. So they've drastically changed the wording to prepare us for the things that they are doing. The NIV is the worst of, as Stan says, the perversions, as far as removing, changing, altering, and adding. One of the things I remember is the Message, and in the Lord's Prayer it uses the term "as above, so below," which is a nice occultic term. The NIV is a New Age Bible, doubt it not. The preface says the first concern of the translators has been the accuracy of the translation and its fidelity to the thought of the writers. So basically we have people that are trying to put themselves in the place of the people that actually wrote the Bible and trying to communicate what they actually thought. NIV translator Herbert Wolf said, while it may be true that at times the NIV translators have been guilty of reading something into the text, I would contend that overall this version has achieved a high degree of accuracy by its philosophy of translation. So they try to support each other in just the things that they're doing. And a good example is this. Dr. Virginia Ramey Mellencott, professor of England at William Patterson College, She was the NIV literary consultant back when the original NIV was written. Came out later that she was gay. In 1984, she wrote the book, The Divine Feminine, The Biblical Imagery of God as a Female, and so in June 1991, it basically came out publicly that she was admitting to be a lesbian. And so the International Bible Society that has control of the NIV, they released a statement that she supposedly only had a small role in the late 1960s and early 1970s in regard to style, but not content. Basically, how it was being presented and not the quality of the content of the translation. But in a radio interview with a Christian talk show host, Joseph Chambers, she recalled working on, quote, big swatches of translations. Many chapters at a time, and my job was to read them with an eye as to how this would communicate with the modern reader and to indicate if I thought there were any infelicities in language that could be corrected. And one of the main passages that people have come against the NIV is that Deuteronomy 23:17. King James says, "There shall be no whore of the daughters of Israel, nor a sodomite of the sons of Israel." The NIV has changed it to, "No Israelite man or woman is to become a shrine prostitute." So it has taken sodomy out of the Bible. From 80 to 85, Malachi, she was one of the 12 members of the Inclusive Language Lectionary Committee who was responsible for producing an in-house version of the Bible for the National Council of Churches that was to be gender neutral. And it was based on the Revised Standard Version that was produced by the National Council of Churches in 1952, who also spewed out the new Revised Standard Version in 1990, which is the Bible of choice for most churches who consider themselves liberal. Now, I actually emailed this lady because I couldn't really find out whether she was actually responsible for this portion of Scripture as far as her work. And she did email me back, and she said that she wasn't. So that means, as a whole, the organization or the group of people who were behind the actual translation themselves were condoning what it was. So where they were trying to put pressure and the focus on her that maybe she was responsible for, she wasn't. So it's the mindset of this crowd who in a whole are working in unison, and it's an orchestrated effort to change the Bible and to make homosexuality politically correct. National Council of Churches, founded in 1908 by Walter Rauschenbusch, a Baptist/socialist, and Henry Ward, a known communist. They started out initially as the Federal Council of Churches, was identified by Congress as a communist organization aimed at the establishment of a state church. The Office of Naval Intelligence reported that they gave aid and comfort to the communist movement and party. In 1942, their platform called for a world government. They were financially supported by Andrew Carnegie and John D. Rockefeller. John Rockefeller, he actually said, "So it may come to pass someday that no one will speak of my country, but will speak of our world." And John Rockefeller was actually a little bit like his father, because his father, when he started in the oil business, he made the comment that competition is a sin, and actually bombed one of his competitors' oil refineries to do away with his competition. But John Rockefeller Jr. helped establish the Union Theological Seminary, and Ward, who helped found the National Council of Churches, he taught religion there and was identified as the chief architect for communist infiltration and subversion in the religious field. Rockefeller donated $26 million to build the Riverside Church in 1930. And this church was pastored by the Reverend Harry Emerson Fosdick, who was a National Council of Churches leader and the former president of the Rockefeller Foundation. He denied the deity of Christ and the virgin birth, and he was also a brother. His brother was Raymond, a member of the Council of Foreign Relations. In 1950, they reorganized and changed the name of the church to the National Council of Churches. They're headquartered in the Inner Church Center on land donated by Rockefeller across from the Riverside Church. It's made up of 36 Protestant, Anglican, and Orthodox denominations, which consists of 140,000 churches. Number of churches in the country are members of the church. I've given like the top few here: United Methodist Church, Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, National Baptist Convention of America, Presbyterian Church USA, Progressive National Baptist Convention, African Methodist Episcopal Church, National Missionary Baptist Convention of America. So some very large churches, and many people are falling under the teachings of the National Council of Churches. Dr. Richard Mao of the Fuller Theological Seminary in California said that the National Council of Church member churches are teaching magic and the occult and the New Age. They have, the National Council of Churches have supported the United States being subordinate to the UN. They have supported the Supreme Court's decision to remove prayer and Bible reading from the schools, and they've also donated money to the Palestinian Liberation Organization and during the 1980s to various communist guerrilla groups. July 15, 1968, in the issue of Approach magazine, Gus Hall, who was the General Secretary of the U.S. Communist Party, said that the communist goals for America is almost identical to those espoused by the liberal church. We can and should work together for the same things. The National Council of Churches is being overseen by the World Council of Churches. And the World Council of Churches met in Amsterdam in 1948. It's really something when you look back and see how many things happened around the same time period. You had the United Nations come along, the birth of Israel as a nation come along, World Council of Churches, the incident in Roswell happened. So you had a lot of things that happened in a short period of time, and I really believe that was a prophetic trigger to prophecy. World Council of Churches is made up of 342 member churches in 120 countries representing 400 million Christians. Also, they have a very liberal agenda. In their socialistic quest to overthrow political tyranny and combat racism, they have given financial aid to 46 revolutionary groups in 17 countries, many of them communist. Dr. John Bennett, member of the World Council of Churches Executive Committee, said communism is to be seen as an instrument of modernization of national unification and increasing social welfare. The World Council of Churches, being that their stage is a world stage, they have a global agenda. Since the 1970s, they've actually been meeting with the Vatican to try to get Catholics and Protestants together. And they've also even trying to get together with Pentecostals. In the 1990s, they've been getting together with Pentecostal groups. And there's actually been some of them meeting together with them. The World Council of Churches, it's a movement towards an ecumenical posturing for all the churches to come together into a world church. New Age, second fastest growing religion next to Islam. Ruth Montgomery explains its foundation as we are as much God as God is part of us, and each of us is God. Together, we are God. And the fact is that New Age, even though it's called New Age, it's not really new. It really goes back to the old religion. The old mystery religion in Babylon is basically coming back, and it's sprinkled with a lot of new things. It's basically a politically correct form of the occult. It's a way that they can operate openly but still perform their religion. And in plain English, New Age is worship of Satan. Lola Davis, author of the book Toward a World Religion for the New Age, has said that the World Council of Churches has the potential to serve as a source of unity among the diversity of religions. So here we're looking how the New Age is influxing in the church itself. Again, just like the Freemasons, they're weakening the church, bringing in their philosophies. Corin and Theodore Heline, New Agers, authors, pseudo-Christian and metaphysical books, said that with the dawning of a new age, an evil Satan who doesn't exist and will vanish from man's memory, and that Christians unfit for the New Age will also cease to exist, being wiped off the earth by a New Age Christ. In the New Age book Reflections on the Christ, David Spangler wrote, "No one will enter the New World Order unless he or she will make a pledge to worship Lucifer. No one will enter the New Age unless he will take a Luciferian initiation." Robert Mueller, a New Ager, former Assistant Secretary General of the UN, suggested that religions should create common world religious institutions, display the UN flag in all houses of worship. He's also called for a universal Bible, which the NIV is pretty much working towards that. He said we must work quickly as possible for a one world government and one world religion under a one world leader. The New Age basically is mixing in with the church, with society itself, basically to wear down Christians, weakening Christians. You can see New Age messages all over the place. Many celebrities have come out involved in various cult groups and stuff like that. And I probably should bring up New Age music at this time, because there's kind of a bad misnomer that New Age music is all bad, and I don't believe it is. There is some that is. But New Age has been put on as a label for certain things, and it's, I mean, you have to judge things by their fruits. I mean, it could be bad, could not be bad, but I think, you know, most of the sort of aggressive, easy listening music is kind of in the New Age section of your record store. So, because I've heard people talk about that, and I feel that needs to be clarified. Again, the philosophy of the New Age is being made to water down and wear out the message of the church because of what the meditation techniques they bring in, which is contrary to focusing on God. And again, going back to the statement from what Morpheus says in the Matrix, you can see it when you look out your window. You know, when you're walking the street, when you're going the everyday doings of your life. This is identifying the Matrix as an all-encompassing system that cannot be avoided, escaped, and brings to mind Big Brother from George Orwell's book 1984. Part of the fifth point of the Illuminati's goal was the institution of communal education for children. Weishaupt wrote, "I propose academies under the direction of the order. This will secure us to the adherence of the literati. Science shall here be the lure." He also wrote, "We shall acquire the direction of education, of church, management of the professorial chair, and of the pulpit." Job one for the Illuminati was to indoctrinate the teachers, the professors, and the educators so that the Illuminati agenda could be then passed on to their students, and bringing a whole new generation into what the goals in their teachings were. Originally, when the Phi Beta Kappa started, as the oldest and most respected undergraduate honors organization in the U.S., they were initially started in 1776 as a secret debating club. But they were infiltrated and used to bring Illuminati principles in the United States. The fraternity had secret hand signals and handshakes up to 1831 when it was more or less reorganized and changed into an honorary society. Now, I don't want to say that everyone that was in Phi Beta Kappa is bad, but we're basically looking at when they started out and what they were used for, because the Illuminati used a lot of different things, and when they didn't need it anymore, it went by the wayside. But when they started out, this is what they used as a vehicle to infiltrate into the United States. Order of the Skull and Bones, founded in Yale University in 1832. One of its founders, General William Russell, was indoctrinated to Illuminati principles on a trip to Germany. It has become known as the Black Lodge of Freemasonry. Their membership mainly consisted of old-line families who can trace their ancestry back to the 1600s. 15 juniors called knights each year are chosen to be members, and upon graduation they have assumed many important positions in business and government. And I just use one name for an example, President Bush and his father. And in the book I go through many names and everything like that. The book is very much a reference source for names and a lot more elaborating on the information I'm going through rather quickly. Johann Gottlieb Fichte, and I'm sure I'm not pronouncing that right, German philosopher, in his 1807 addresses to the German nation said that he did not trust parental influence and wanted educational environment to be controlled by the state. Between 1808 and 1819, the Prussian government became the first to have compulsory education and instituted a three-tier system. The children of the elite, which was half of 1%, went to academies and were taught to be independent thinkers. About 5% went to a school where they were partially taught to think, and the other 94% went to another school where the idea of being a good citizen was stressed. William Torrey Harris, U.S. Commissioner of Education, 1889 and 1906, graduate of Yale, bad sign right there, was quoted as saying, "Our schools have been scientifically designed to prevent overeducation from happening." He believed that schools should alienate kids from parents and religion. John Dewey, father of American education, was a members of the Fabian Society in America, established the Intercollegiate Socialist Society to promote socialism on college campuses. Dewey was a founding member. His system of progressive education used psychology to de-emphasize academics. In My Ketogenic Creed, 1897, and the School and Society, 1899, he said that the school should be instrumental in developing socialism. And in July 1908, in the Hibbert Journal, he was quoted as saying, "Our schools are performing an infinite religious work. They are promoting the social unity out of which, in the end, genuine religious unity must grow." Andrew Carnegie, 1835 to 1990, came to the U.S. as a poor immigrant from Scotland, and he built the Carnegie Steel Corporation. In 1908, he retired and sold the company to J.P. Morgan for $500 million, which at that time was a lot of money. And so after that, he was able to spend all of his time spending his money. Became a philanthropist. He wrote a series of 11 essays in 1890 simply entitled Wealth. And actually some of the information that's in this presentation is not in the book, and I'll tell you why that is. William T. Stead, editor of the Pall Mall Gazette, changed the title to The Gospel of Wealth. And when I read this name, I knew that he was involved in something else. It just clicked to me that name. So I went and further looked, and he was actually a follower of spiritualism, was a confidant of Cecil Rhodes, the British financier, and a founding member of the group in 1891 that was basically the roots of the New World Order. But what will happen when you start getting into this research and you start hearing names will click. Well, I heard that name somewhere before, and you'll find out that the same names are spread upon the whole spectrum of the New World Order. I heard some national talk show host, I think it was G. Gordon Liddy, and he was saying that there is no New World Order because there's so many different groups and they're all working for different things. But that's not true, because when you look at all the different groups, you'll see they have a common membership. A lot of the same people belong to the different groups, so they are unified and they do have a single goal. And I just mentioned Cecil Rhodes, and I want to take a little rabbit trail here. Cecil Rhodes, in his 7th and last will, established an educational grant known as the Rhodes Scholarships. So that takes us back a little bit to one of the things that they used to indoctrinate students. A 2-year program used to promote globalism and one world government, and the name right off the top of my head as a Rhodes Scholar was Bill Clinton. The underlying premise was that the free enterprise system had been, and this is the book that Carnegie wrote, the underlying premise was that J.P. Morgan and John D. Rockefeller controlled everything. And his concern was that generations coming later would realize this and come against them. So his solution was to control the educational system so that children would only be taught what the social engineers wanted them to know. One of the foundations there's 2 foundations, major foundations, the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching and the Carnegie Corporation of New York. The foundation in 1906 is known as a policy center devoted to the strengthening of teaching and learning. The corporation, 1911, is the financial support used to promote the advancement and diffusion of knowledge and understanding. And Carnegie is pretty well known for giving away $350 million to build public libraries and endow universities. The Carnegie Endowment for International Peace was started in 1910. The first president of that organization was Elihu Root. He was a socialist, and its 3rd president was Alger Hiss, who was a communist in the 50s. In 1934, they identified themselves as an unofficial instrument of international policy. And in 1947, they were committed to supporting the United Nations and organizations like the Council on Foreign Relations, and so which goes to show that they were working towards the same goal. Norman Dodd, July 1953, was appointed to head the Congressional Investigation of Foundations. He found out that the reason for the foundation supposedly was to not have to pay income tax, but he found out that there was actually foundations in existence before income tax. The Carnegie Endowment concluded that war was the most effective way to alter the life of the people of a nation. He also discovered that high-level appointments within our State Department and the federal government had to be approved by a special board within the Carnegie Endowment. In minutes to one meeting, he saw the record of a note to President Wilson requesting that he see to it that the war does not end too quickly. Dodd said they wanted to bring the idea of one world government to the point where it was acceptable to the people of this country, and that is their primary aim. He discovered they believed that the only way to maintain the control of a population was to obtain control of education in the United States. And they actually teamed up with the Rockefeller Foundation, who would handle the domestic aspects, whereas Carnegie would handle the international aspects. Renee Wormser, legal counsel for the Reese Committee, who investigated foundations back in the 50s, said that the Carnegie Endowment was attempting to mold the minds of our children by deciding what should be read in our schools and colleges. And Augustus Thomas, president of the World Federation of Educational Associations, said in August 1927 that we can't jump into a new world order until the cobwebs of the old order are brushed out of the minds of the people of all lands. 1947, the American Education Fellowship, which was formerly known as a Progressive Education Association, which was actually a communist front organization founded by John Dewey, called for the establishment of a genuine world order, an order in which national sovereignty is subordinate to world authority. So you can see where the educational institution of this country has been pushing us towards one world government. Rockefeller Foundation. John D. Rockefeller Sr. began Standard Oil in 1870. Became the largest oil refinery in the world, and he was this country's first billionaire. And he was one of a dozen people at that time who controlled the country's business interests. 1911, the Standard Oil of New Jersey, actually known as Exxon, who the congressional record called the shadow government, was ordered by the Supreme Court to be broken up. With Rockefeller owning 25%, that meant that every company, the resulting 38 companies, he actually owned 25% of each company that was created. So in May 1913, he likewise started a foundation. And believe me, a lot of things are done when you look into the foundation papers and reports. There's so much that's done with their money, it's not even funny. I mean, there's like volumes of books showing where they give their money to. Rockefeller Foundation, the stated goals were to promote the well-being of mankind throughout the world. And then in a 1946 report, it's more accurately stated its intent was the challenge of the future was to make this one world. Eugene Cox, after the first investigation of the foundations in 1952, said the foundations were using their resources for subversive activities or purposes not in the interest or tradition of the United States. He also said that the Rockefeller Foundation has been used to finance individuals and organizations whose business it has been to get communism into private and public schools of the country. Sort of leads us to where we're at now. Again, we're going over things very quickly because I want to give you a really general view of everything. And basically the book is just very much the same. It's very rapid fire, a lot of facts, a lot of figures. It's not a book you want to take to the beach to read. Goals 2000 was an Educate America Act developed in the early 1990s to revamp the public school system. It was born out of the April 1970 Bilderberger meeting in Switzerland that said that our schools were too nationalistic and that students needed to be indoctrinated to become world citizens. Signed into law by Clinton in 1994, it became the educational system known as outcome-based education. And that went hand in hand with the School to Work Opportunities Act of 1994, which changed the focus of education to outcomes and de-emphasized education and concentrated more on what kids would be doing after school as far as training and getting them into the workforce and indoctrinating them into being good citizens, good followers, listening to the government, trusting their government. Point one of the Illuminati's goals was the abolition of the monarchy and all-order government. And I sort of go through, and you're not going to be able to read this, but the reason for this is you can basically see the evolution of the political system from the late 1700s. And you can basically, the Anti-Federalist Party and the Federalist Party, you can go down and you can sort of see where people from one group would go to another group. And you can see how it basically goes back and forth. You know, like in this slide, you see how people from the Democratic Party went over to the Whig Party, and then people from the Whig Party went over to the Republican Party. And you see people went from the Whig Party to the Liberty Party. Some of the Democrats went over to the Liberty Party, went down to the Free Soil Party. You know, some of the people from the Whig Party went down to the Constitutional Party, then went over to the Republican Party. And going on down the line, and what this goes to show you, there's no concrete political philosophy in this country. People are just back and forth, so there's no party system, and that becomes important when you see where the alliances are in some of the organizations. The highlight here is the Populist and the Progressive Party, and you'll see how that works in a little while. But the Populist Party basically went into the Progressive Party, and the Progressive Party went into the Communist Party. The populist philosophy expressed concern for financial power being concentrated in the hands of a few and was against the private Wall Street banks. They were against the gold standard, sought labor reforms, and the establishment of unions for workers' rights. They wanted more currency placed into circulation and the initiation of credit programs, and they advocated a progressive income tax. Even though they became integrated through that chart into the Democratic Party, their actual principles were embraced by the Progressive Party, which was a coalition of liberals, socialists, left-wing labor leaders and farmers who wanted aggressive social programs and an end to the control of government and industry by private interests. Their aggressive lobbying efforts helped bring about the Federal Reserve Act and the federal income tax. And while many of the other goals were achieved later on down the line, you can see where there's sort of trickle-down things where things are incrementally being done. Everything is always done little by little. So and that's the Fabian aspect of it. It's done little by little so you don't see what's going on. And how you can see that is years ago, you never seen the kind of stuff on TV that you're seeing now. And of course, everyone knows the big flash by Janet Jackson at the Super Bowl. And really, there wasn't that much of a commotion on it like there would have been years ago. I mean, yeah, there was a little bit of commotion on it, but for the most part, there's not that much negative from people itself, And so little by little, I mean, years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, heads would have rolled. But so we're being developed more and more to accept things. In 1829, there was a British Illuminist named Francis Wright who came to who came to New York City to promote a women's auxiliary of the Illuminati. Now remember, the Illuminati as an organization started in 1776. So we're basically getting the ball rolling here. They're getting into the United States at this time, trying to build alliances and starting to get people acclimated to the things they want to do as far as their goals. This lady was associated with Robert Dale Owen, who was a well-known socialist, and he's pretty much prominent in the history of socialism. Those present were told that an international movement of subversives were being developed along the lines of Illuminati principles, and they were to be known as communists. And this is the name that was actually used, and they were told that this organization was to bring chaos so the Illuminati could step in and bring order. So regardless of what we're told about what the communistic movement actually is, this is the birth of the communist organization that was birthed through the Illuminati to be an opposing force to bring chaos to the world. 1843, an article by poet Heinrich Heine was published in a book called Latisse, contained this package: communism is the secret name of the tremendous adversary. Communism is nonetheless the dark hero cast for an enormous, if fleeting, role in the modern tragedy and waiting his cue to enter the stage. There was 3 men who were appointed to help raise funds for this effort. And all 3 were members of the Columbia Lodge of the Order of the Illuminati, which had been established in New York City in 1785. First gentleman was Clinton Roosevelt. This is not Clinton Roosevelt. I couldn't find a picture of Clinton Roosevelt, but he was actually the ancestor to FDR, Franklin Roosevelt. But this gentleman was a New York assemblyman. He wrote a book called The Science of Government, founded on natural law, in which he said there is no God of justice to order things aright on earth. And he said that the Constitution was a leaky vessel which was hastily put together when we left the British flag and therefore needed to be revised. Horace Greeley was the second man. He was the editor of the New York Tribune and the New Yorker magazine. And he was one of the ones that helped reorganize the Republican Party after they went all through their phases and going back and forth in 1854. And then in 1872, he ran for president on the liberal Republican ticket. There's different things that should stick in your mind when you see liberal. Obviously you see the word liberal, there's something going on there. Now, he actually employed Karl Marx as a correspondent to cover the 1848 European revolutions. So you look at the names, you look at the organizations, you look at the people they hang out with, and you look at their fruits. The Bible says you should know them by their fruits. That's why when in our society today, we can't look at things like that. We can't, there are so many things going on and politicians doing a lot of different things, and because we're so involved in everything, we can't keep an eye on what everyone's doing. There are people doing that and that have websites and that actually keep an eye on where people travel, who they meet with, how long they're there. So there are things in place for you to be informed if you want to be informed. Third gentleman was Charles Dana. He was the city editor on the New York Tribune, later became the editor of the New York Sun. Secretary of War Edwin Stanton had appointed him to be Assistant Secretary of War, and he was a socialist that actually lived in one of the experimental socialist communities known as the Brook Farm community. And these 3 gentlemen were very well known at the time, and they were used to raise funds to basically brainwash people into accepting this movement and to bring people in for leadership roles and to raise money and for finances. And leads us to Karl Marx. Karl Marx had a doctorate in philosophy and also studied economics. And as a teenager, he actually believed in God and trying to actually find out the incident in his life that made him an atheist. Could never find it, but something in his teenage years turned him around into what he became. When he went to college, he said that he wanted to avenge himself against the one who rules above. And he actually joined a satanic church, and there was in his writings there is mentioned a ritualistic name for Satan. 1848, he wrote the Communist Manifesto. History tells us that he worked on it from 1830 to 1847, and it represented an extension of Friedrich Engels' Confessions of a Communist. Friedrich Engels was his cohort in all of this, and actually was probably the one who had more of the inkling of putting everything down on paper, where Karl Marx was the visionary. In reality, many of Marx's ideas were gleaned from Weishaupt, Babeuf, Blank, Owen, Ogilvy, Hodgkin, Gray, Thompson, Carpenter, all of whom were involved in socialism. And also the Clinton Roosevelt's book on the natural law, that was also used there too. And actually, Karl Marx's name was not actually added to the manifesto until 20 years later. Now, Marx had joined the Communist League in London, and they commissioned the writing of the manifesto as their platform. And they were formerly known as the League of Just Men, which is the offshoot of the Parisian Outlaws League, which was founded by the Illuminati members who fled from Germany and were behind the French Revolution. They were called Jacobins. They had basically, when the German government came down on the Illuminati, they already had plans in the works for the French Revolution, and they went into France and started Jacobin clubs. And September 28, 1864, there was a meeting of the International Working Men's Association in London. And it was the Illuminati principles that were adopted, not the socialism that they thought that they were getting involved with. Marx later wrote to Engels, "I was present only as a dumb personage on the platform." And another report was from a Swiss socialist in attendance that said it was not true that the Internationale was a creation of Karl Marx. He was solely outside the preparatory work that took place from 1862 to 1864. And so people that are in the know the true mechanics behind the scenes of what communism actually represents. I remember reading something a couple years ago, I believe it was a book by Gary Allen, how David Rockefeller went over to Europe, and then suddenly Khrushchev was taken out of office. And it was believed that David Rockefeller had something to do with it. Whether he did or not, I can't say, but there's a lot of things that happen over in Russia only after calls to New York. So there's definitely a connection there. Taylor Caldwell wrote in her 1972 novel Captains and the Kings, which was turned into a miniseries on NBC years ago, back during the 70s. She wrote that it wasn't until the era of the League of Just Men and Karl Marx that conspirators and conspiracies became one, with one aim, one objective, and one determination. The manifesto advocated the abolition of private property, a heavy progressive or graduated income tax, the abolition of rights of inheritance, the confiscation of all the property of immigrants and rebels, the centralization of credit in the hands of the state with a national bank, centralization and state control of all communication and transportation, and free education for all children in public schools. And I color-coded that to see where in the yellow you can see those were the Illuminati goals. On the red you can see that they were the progressive or the populist goals, and in the blue they were the progressive goals as far as the Progressive Party. And so you can see they were all working together under different names but with the same goals. And again, like you can't, a lot of the talk shows, like, I like Rush Limbaugh, but he does not accept the talk of the New World Order. And a lot of people, they think you're over the edge, you're paranoid. Well, you're not paranoid, they're really after you. But you got to be very careful, and when you're talking to people about this sort of thing, because you can really come out as being over the edge and paranoid, But to me, I'm trying to put together a presentation where you can really bring up to people as evidence that you can use in an argument, because these are things that you're living in now, that you could concretely identify as being part of something that shouldn't be, that is being used to control us. The financing aspect of communism actually can be traced in a lot of different directions, because you have different organizations that are actually involved in the communist movement. As far as the Fabian organization was one. They were very socialistic oriented, and there was people that was giving to that movement, but that movement was actually contributing to communism, the communistic movement. But it's on record where financing for communism came through Nathan Rothschild and Jacob Schiff, who was part of the partnership of Kuhn and Loeb in New York. He gave $20 million. Sir George Buchanan, a British civil engineer, he gave quite a bit of money. Paul and Felix Warburg, who were also in the partnership of Kuhn and Loeb, gave money. Olaf Oxberg, Nye Bank in Stockholm, Sweden, contributed to the communistic movement. William Boyce Thompson of Chase National gave $1 million. Chase National is the bank of the Rockefellers that actually became Chase Manhattan Bank. Albert Wiggin, also of Chase National, gave money. The Krupp family, German steel manufacturer, gave a lot of money also to the communist movement. February 5th, 1891, Cecil Rhodes, who we discussed earlier as part of the Rhodes Scholarship Program, he was very much influenced by wanting to pull together people into a world government, and his writings very much wanted an Atlantic-based power of white people. Basically, he felt that the white people was the superior race, and so he basically started an organization of pulling together the minds of people at that time who believed in what the things he was saying. And Lord Alfred Milner, who was a British statesman and a Rothschild agent, he was one of the main people he pulled together. Arnold Toynbee, professor at Oxford University, he also was very much a main one, and his writings and everything indicated his coinciding of his views with one world government. Arthur Glazebrook, Bank of North America and Canada, part of the organization. George Parkin, secretary of the Rhodes Trust, again, a confidant of Cecil Rhodes, was part of this group. Philip Lyttelton Gell, Oxford University, part of the group. Sir Henry Birkenau, president of British South Africa Company. William Stead, editor of Pall Mall Gazette. Now here's the thing that I found, where he was also the gentleman that changed the name of Carnegie's writings. And so here he is. He's the guy that's one of the biggies involved as the foundational group behind what would later become the New World Order. Reginald Brett Lord Esher, Deputy Governor of Windsor Castle. Sir John Seeley, who was a historian, and Lord Albert Grey, Administrator of Rhodesia, and he was also a director of the British South Africa Company, along with Sir Henry up there. And these are men that are very well known at the time, probably people that you had not heard their names, but at that time they were very well known people. Edmund Garrett, editor of the Cape Times in South Africa. Lord Arthur Balfour, leader of the House of Commons. Sir Harry Johnson, British administrator in Africa. And Lord Curtis, who was a colonial secretary to Transvaal. Philip Kerr, Central South African Railway Commission. William S. Maris, Deputy Secretary of India. Robert Brand of the Lazarus Brothers Bank. And Lord Robert Cecil, British lawyer and cabinet minister. Henry Temperley, history professor at Cambridge, and Lord Eustace Perry, who was the Foreign Office staff member. All these people were very well-known people at the time, and they were people that had influence in different areas of the world. They had people that had influence in different areas of government, business, commerce, religion, and they were able to bring an influx and basically put fingers out there where they could begin pulling together like-minded people to have an organization that they would be able to control. The goal of this, and there really wasn't, there's various names that are going around as to what they were actually called, but there's no concrete name. There was an inner circle, there was an outer circle, And the inner circle obviously knew what was going on. The outer circle didn't know everything that was going on. And their goal was to establish a one world government that would be controlled by the international banking community under the cloak of socialism. And they saw England not as a European power, but as an Atlantic power. And where that kind of comes into play, and I ascribe to the view that the Antichrist is going to come out of Western Europe. So this sort of goes along with that European power. And I believe that basically from London is where the world is basically controlled, and London and New York, and that's where the powers are. They wanted a federation of the English-speaking world, which would be controlled by them. Between 1909 and 1913, in the English-speaking countries of the world, they established roundtable groups to facilitate their world dominance. And between 1919 and 1927, organizations called the Institute of International Affairs were started as cover groups to hide their subversive activities. And in the United States, this group was known as the Council on Foreign Relations. Now, one thing you have to understand, and you can see it in the communist groups, where there would be front organizations where they would put up a storefront, put a sign up there, and maybe have a really good, nice name like the Democratic Friendship Society or something like that. When actually it's a communist front where a lot of subversive things are being done through that name, and you don't know it. And the Illuminati works also the same way. They have a front, and then they work behind the scenes to accomplish their goals. Council of Foreign Relations. 1918, a group of banking and manufacturing leaders met under the leadership of Elihu Root, former New York Senator and Secretary of State under Theodore Roosevelt. Again, you see a name here, and you have to go back, and we've seen his name under the Carnegie Endowment. So again, these men are all across the spectrum, and when you read the book, you'll see all the different names, and believe me, it will start clicking, because you may not be able to remember like in a conversation, but if you see it, you'll know you've seen that name somewhere before. And the reason for that is obviously with the goals that an organization like this has, you can't just trust everyone. So you have the same people that are involved in various aspects, because these are people that can be trusted. These are people who are very effective in the work and job that they do for their goals. Edward House was Woodrow Wilson's advisor, and he assembled a group called the Inquiry, which was used to negotiate solutions for the Paris Peace Conference in World War I. In 1919, House formed an Institute for International Affairs in New York City, while the Inquiry became the American branch of the Roundtable. And in 1921, of course, in 1921, one of the things that President Woodrow Wilson wanted to push was a League of Nations, and the United States never got into that. And it was basically the second time that the international bankers tried to institute world government. The first one was actually was a Congress that took place back in the 1800s, where they tried to get the world together. And the Tsar in Russia actually shot that down, which is why they had a special affinity for wanting to get rid of the Tsar later with the communist movement. And so this second attempt for world government wasn't going to work out, because people just didn't like the idea of what it was representing. So because they knew it wasn't going to happen, they just decided that they were going to start sort of changing their goals and how they operated. And so what happened, the two groups that had started under the Council on Foreign Relations and the Inquiry then merged as just one name, the Council on Foreign Relations. And the reason why they became known as the Council on Foreign Relations rather than the international group that was using names and organizations around the rest of the country, because they didn't want to be tied to them. By 1936, their membership reached 250 people. And at that time, they had influence on newspapers like the New York Times, the New York Herald Tribune, the Christian Science Monitor, the Washington Post, and the Boston Evening Transcript. And you can see here that this is the beginning of the effect on the media, because once you are able to affect the media, once you are able to manipulate the media, then you can basically do almost anything in this country. And one of the things that we saw just in the Democratic primaries is what happened with Howard Dean in Iowa, the night of Iowa. They got kind of a little rowdy up there, and the media used that and basically killed his chances to be president. And what happened, they manipulated it in a way they didn't play the whole tape. If they would have played the whole tape, then people would have seen in what context he was acting the way he was acting. But the way it was presented, he came across as what they call it Screamgate. And basically, whether he would have been a good candidate or not, I mean, I'm not commenting on that. But they destroyed the media destroyed his chances by manipulating the news in order to make people think that he would not be a good president. So this is a way that, and this kind of control, command and control, had to come from the media, at an early time where, just as they did with education, they got into it little by little. Well, that's exactly what they did with the media. They got in it little by little. So eventually getting people as editors, getting people into position and to be able to change the news and mold it the way they needed to be presented, so the people of the country would be able to say, well, yes, well, that is the way it should be, because their minds have been molded by the media. One of the main things that, and again, the political aspect, going back to the political chart where I showed you that how the party system actually works in this country and how they've acted, the parties are actually interlocked. And you'll see that in these organizations, the same people are involved in the organization. They're working towards a common goal. It doesn't matter whether they're Democrat or Republican, they're working towards a common goal. And in order for them to be able to get this country acclimated to what their goals actually are, it has to be done through the government. So there was a way that they had to be able to infiltrate the government in order to get their views across. And the government itself, there's a reason why that political philosophy doesn't change when one president leaves office and another president takes over. And this had to stem from way back, because I tell you, some of the people that have been president were not able to run a country. And so what has to happen is there has to be advisors, there has to be people directing all that stuff behind the scenes. And the way that was done was when these groups started. Now you have these groups getting together and they represent experts in their field. And you have people coming from the field of economics, you have people coming from commerce, you have people coming from banking, you have people coming from the socialistic side of things, as far as what kind of social programs do we need this country to be involved with in order for our country to flourish as a society. So we're having all these people coming together as experts in this field, and they're under the umbrella of the Council on Foreign Relations. And the way that was implemented was the study group system, and that's how the study group system is being used actually by quite a few organizations in this country. So with these study groups, the Council on Foreign Relations was able to basically begin an influx into our federal government. President Franklin Roosevelt utilized their study groups on the self-sufficiency, and out of that came the Export-Import Bank and the Trade Agreements Act of 1934. And in 1939, before World War II, the State Department utilized 5 different study groups that came under the umbrella name of the War and Peace Project to make recommendations in regard to national security and economics. And in 1941, the Advisory Committee on Post-War Foreign Policy was created, and this consisted basically of people who are Council on Foreign Relations members, and Frederick Roosevelt actually referred to this group as his post-war advisors. So whereas we saw during the Woodrow Wilson administration where House was very much a confidant to Woodrow Wilson, we can see how these study groups basically became very much a confidant to Franklin Roosevelt. December 1943, as World War II began to come to an end, the Council on Foreign Relations study groups planned the reconstruction of Germany and Japan, the establishment of the United Nations, and the initiation of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, or the UN International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, which was presented at the Dumbarton Oaks Conference. So very much the Council on Foreign Relations was involved in the creation of the United Nations. Now obviously, because the Council on Foreign Relations is is a one world government oriented group, it's obvious that any sort of influence they would have on a world organization of bringing nations together for world peace is going to be oriented towards a one world government. And during their first meeting in San Francisco, there were so many Council on Foreign Relations people there, and people in communist groups and stuff like that. And just by seeing the names of the people that were there and seeing the socialist leanings, the communist leanings, the Democratic Party leanings, you can see, where the roots of the United Nations actually are and where they came from. The New York Times wrote that the Council's membership includes some of the most influential men in government, business, education, and the press, and for nearly half a century has made substantial contributions to the basic concepts of American foreign policy. And now we're talking about a source that is already an establishment source, so and this is what they're saying about the organization itself. Newsweek called the Council's leadership the foreign policy establishment of the United States. So they're giving a good vibe to what this group actually is. And when you see the sources, the media sources that they control, and when they're saying something like this, they're brainwashing you to believe, well, this is okay. This group's okay. Well-known political observer and writer Theodore White said the Council counts among its members probably more important names in American life than any other private group in the country. Curtis Dow wrote in his book, FDR, My Exploited Father-in-Law, said, for a long time, I felt that FDR had developed many thoughts and ideas that were his own to benefit this country, the USA, but he did. Many of his thoughts, his political ammunition, as it were carefully manufactured for him in advance by the CFR One World Money Group. And this alludes, again, to the study groups that were used by Franklin Roosevelt, because when somebody's elected president, they obviously don't have the background in the various areas that they need to run the government. And so he used the expertise these groups offered him, and they came to him. They volunteered their services to say that, we can direct you in the areas we think this country needs to go. Senator Barry Goldwater, 1979 memoir, With No Apologies, he wrote, when a new president comes on board, there is a great turnover in personnel, but no change in policy. And I alluded to that before, when the direction of this country doesn't change. As each president comes and goes, the economy continues to get worse. I mean, there's flourishes to the positive here and there, but on the whole, our economy continues to get worse. Inflation continues to get worse. The morality of this country continues to grow. There's no change in the direction this country is taking, and the reason for that is because the groups that are working behind the scenes, the organizations who are working behind the scenes, and when you look at the organizational strata of the Council on Foreign Relations and the different finger organizations, there's many other organizations all below these groups that are working towards the same goals. The CFR members have held key positions in every single administration from Franklin Roosevelt to George W. Bush. Just a couple people here. Obviously, in the book, I go through a lot of names and the positions that they hold within the government. Richard Cheney, Vice President. Colin Powell, Secretary of State. Condoleezza Rice, National Security Advisor. Paul Wolfowitz, Deputy Secretary of Defense. These are like the main people in the Bush administration that are part of the Council on Foreign Relations now. Obviously, that any sort of direction that these people give President Bush in the various areas of their expertise, it obviously can't be good. Obviously, Richard Cheney has been in the government before as Secretary of Defense. Colin Powell obviously was involved in Desert Storm. So we can see how even when Bush became president, he pulled from these people immediately because they were involved in his dad's administration, and also because of the aura that he wanted to bring to his presidency. James P. Warburg, banker, economist, and member of Franklin Roosevelt's Brain Trust and son of Paul Warburg of the Council on Foreign Relations, told The Senate Foreign Relations Committee on February 17, 1950, we shall have world government whether or not we like it. The only question is whether world government will be achieved by conquest or consent. So there's a lot of different things. The congressional record really is a good source for a lot of things that are said in congressional hearings and stuff like that. And so you can see, as a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, you can see what their goals are. They're basically telling you right up front what their goals are. I can remember I had initially wrote the manuscript for this book I pulled it together in 1984. And that was before I was married, and I told my wife, I said, you should have never married a man that had 2 4-drawer filing cabinets in his bedroom. So, and she would go to bed early and I'd be over her apartment and I'd be working on my book on her kitchen table. And so I basically put it together, and I was trying to get it published, and one of the Christian bookstores in the area had offered to sell it for me. So I made copies and was selling the manuscript through there, and it actually sold pretty good, but I was trying to get it published, and it was very kind of unsuccessful so I sort of threw the manuscript in a box. But after the Persian Gulf War in the early 90s, I began to see where they were acclimating our country to the term New World Order. And after I began to realize that, I said, well, I got to get this out, and I got to rework this. And I can remember my wife standing in the doorway of the den saying, you've been working on this book ever since I met you. And I'm still working on the book. But, in the early 90s, you can see where using the term New World Order, which is it's a term that's actually used many years ago. It's not really a new term. But New World Order was the thing to make it, using that term back then, in conjunction with the Persian Gulf War, where we pulled a lot of allies together to have a coalition to go against Iraq, which we probably had more justification at that time than this time. And the term New World Order was propagated upon us at that time to make us think that this is a good thing, this is a positive thing. And the quote that we have here is it takes on a negative connotation. So they had to change that to give it a positive connotation and to make it look like that we want this when we don't really want this. Chicago Tribune, December 9, 1950, said the members of the council are persons of much more than average influence in the community. They have used the prestige that their wealth, their social position, their education have given them to lead their country towards bankruptcy and military debacle. They should look at their hands. There is blood on them, the dried blood of the last war and the fresh blood of the present one. 1954, the Special House Committee to Investigate Tax-Exempt Foundations, the Reese Committee, said that, now this was the same committee that also, we had the quote earlier from Norman Dodd talking about the communist leanings of the foundations, and it sort of all went hand in hand because a lot of the foundation, the officers of the foundations are also involved in major companies that are affecting the finance of this nation, and together with cross membership in various organizations, the CFR came up in this investigation, the Council on Foreign Relations. So the Council on Foreign Relations was, in essence, an agency of the United States government, and he discovered that their directives were aimed at overwhelmingly at promoting the globalistic concept. So these are things that actually at that time did not come out that much in the press. People weren't aware of the kinds of things that were going on behind the scenes because people had the connotation in their mind when they think of foundations, all foundations are doing a good thing. So there really wasn't a lot of attention on one of the hearings at that time. Harper's Magazine, July 1958, said that the Council on Foreign Relations want to bring about the surrender of the sovereignty and the national independence of the United States. What they strive for would inevitably lead to dictatorship and loss of freedoms by the people. The CFR was founded for the purpose of promoting disarmament and submergence of U.S. sovereignty and national independence into an all-powerful one-world government. And we could see at that time where the word was getting out, but it wasn't getting out. Because at the time, especially at that time, you're coming out of the communist era where there was the McCarthy era and stuff like that. So if you ascribe to points of view like this, you were really considered a radical. So people that did know about this stuff didn't really talk about it. December 23rd, 1961, columnist Edith Kermit Roosevelt, who was the granddaughter of President Theodore Roosevelt, wrote in the Indianapolis News that the CFR's policies favor gradual surrender of the United States sovereignty to the United Nations. And again, because of how much of the policy of socialism, of communism that was involved in the tenets of the Council on Foreign Relations, and because of the major philosophies of the Council on Foreign Relations being hoisted upon the United Nations from its concept in the 1940s, we can see where they're coming from with this quote. And of course, the United Nations, we have to make it look like that it's a good thing. We have to make it like that this country agrees with it. And it was like a major public relations gimmick to be able to do that. And a lot of things were covered up, and so that the people didn't know what the real reason for it. It was a little bit differently when the League of Nations in the early 1900s was trying to make a world government. People, basically, I believe because it was a more Christian nation, I think more people's eyes were open to what was trying to go on. But you're talking about in the mid-century, then I believe that we were basically starting to go downhill because Christianity was beginning to weaken in this country, and I believe that's why they were more or less being able to do more things at that time. Like I said, that middle era of 1948 with those different things happening, which I described as a prophetic trigger, I believe that at that time really a web of deceit began coming over this country to be able to hide things that they could begin operating behind the scenes. Researcher Dan Smoot, a former FBI agent, said that their goal, the Council on Foreign Relations, was to create a one-world socialist system and make the United States an official part in it. An official part in that we're in it and don't know that we're in it. Representative John Rarick of Louisiana said in 1971 that the Council on Foreign Relations was dedicated to one world government, is financed by a number of the largest tax-exempt foundations, and wielding such power and influence over our lives in the areas of finance, business, labor, military, education, and mass communications media. This is a gentleman that actually spoke out quite a bit on the Council on Foreign Relations, and also on the Federal Reserve, and also on the income tax, and very much criticized for doing so. Unfortunately, he was also a Mason, which I never understood that. But when you go through the volumes of information that when you start researching the foundations, and you can see where they give all their money to, and I mean, literally it's volume. You have to go to, usually many major libraries carry the information, and I mean, it lists the group, it lists the amount of money they get, and you can see exactly what the goals of the foundations are by seeing who they give money to. Now, granted that there's some, they do some good. I mean, the Shriners do some good. Everyone does some good, but behind every good that these groups do, there is an evil. So, 1975 book called Kissinger on the Couch by Phyllis Schlafly and Rear Admiral Chester Ward, who was the former Judge Advocate General of the Navy from 1956 to 60, and he had been a member of the Council on Foreign Relations for 16 years. He wrote that once the rolling members of the Council on Foreign Relations have decided that the U.S. government should adopt a particular policy, the very substantial research facilities of the CFR are put to work to develop arguments, intellectual and emotional, to support the new policy and to confound and discredit and intellectually and politically any opposition. When you go to the Council on Foreign Relations, they have a website, they have books, they have magazine, Foreign Affairs. When you go to this type of material, they generally give you a disclaimer that, well, we're not officially involved in the government and we don't have any say in what the government does, but it's real strange that a lot of the policies that ferment within their discussion groups and with their study groups actually become government policy years later. And when you begin to realize how they work, and then you have in your mind, it's almost like you can't trust anyone. And basically, when it comes to certain aspects of what they have control over, you have to take everything with a grain of salt. You just can't take it for granted that your government is telling you the truth. I want to say that not all government is bad. And I'm not going to say that we live in the greatest country in the world. I'm not anti-government, but we have what began as pockets within the government that has graduated into groups within the government that are working behind the scenes to do things that are contrary to the country that was established here. In the Council on Foreign Relations, you have various people who were either past or present members. Tom Brokaw, Bill Moyers, John Chancellor, Irving Levine from NBC, Roone Artledge, David Brinkley, Barbara Walters, Diane Sawyer, saw the interview with Mel Gibson, maybe you kind of wonder why she took the slant that she did, well, she's a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. George Stephanopoulos, who was involved in the Carter administration, ABC. William Paley, Dan Rather, Harry Reasoner, Marvin Kalb, John Scally, Daniel Shore with CBS. William Buckley, Robert McNeil, Jim Lehrer, Hot and Carter 3, also involved in the Carter administration, PBS. So you can see we have some major heavy hitters in the media that are presenting as talking heads the news every day, and people are listening. People are buying it. It's unbelievable. Walter Cronkite, who was like one of the most trusted people in America, is for one world government. I mean, he has said so. And so the people that you see on TV that you may respect, you know, if they're members of these organizations, they have an underlying goal to manipulate the media to coincide with the goals of the groups they belong to. Newspapers that present their views: New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, Boston Globe, Baltimore Sun, Chicago Sun-Times, LA Times Syndicate, Houston Post, Minneapolis Star and Tribune, Des Moines Register and Tribune, some of the newspapers and news services: Associated Press, United Press International, Reuters News Service, Arkansas Gazette, Louisville Courier, and USA Today. USA Today, which is owned by the Gannett Company, has great influence over this country because they not only have USA Today, they have many other smaller papers and many other media sources. As with some of these, obviously New York Times and Washington Post, their stories are picked up by other local papers, as is Associated Press and UPI. So these are major sources of news that other local sources pick up, and so you can see where the news that they present are passed on down the line. Magazines: Time, Fortune, Life, Money, People, Entertainment Weekly, Sports Illustrated, U.S. News and World Report, Saturday Review, Newsweek, National Review, Reader's Digest, Business Week, Atlantic Monthly, McCall's, Forbes, Look, Harper's Magazine. These are sources where the editors and people in major control of the editorial content are people who belong to the Council on Foreign Relations. You know, when they're having big editorial meetings, when they take the angles on the news, things are discussed that we have to manipulate things this way, we have to look at it this way, and they alter and manipulate the news to present it in a way that is probably completely contrary to what the actual events are. David Rockefeller said in 1991, "We are grateful to the Washington Post, the New York Times, Time Magazine, and other great publications whose directors have attended our meetings and respected their promises of discretion for almost 40 years. It would have been impossible for us to develop our plan for the world if we had been subject to the bright lights of publicity during these years. But the world is now more sophisticated and prepared to march towards a world government. The supranational sovereignty of an intellectual elite and world bankers is surely preferable to the national autodetermination practice in past centuries." So obviously the names of the media people who we just went through, they are invited to their meetings and they don't say anything. They know there are things discussed at these meetings that don't get out in the media. And when they have these meetings, they have security people that come in vans, clear places out. Sometimes they have meetings in hotels that sweep for bugs, and they clear out whole floors, and they do a lot of stuff so people don't find out what's discussed in their meetings. So here we have media people who a lot of people trust, that they see every night in the news, that they're friends. You're friends with that guy that's telling you the news on TV. You feel like you could trust him. But they've been to these meetings. They know exactly what's going on, and they could tell you line upon line exactly what's going on, but they don't because they agree with the goals of the organizations they belong to. Trilateral Commission. Just went through the quote from David Rockefeller. David Rockefeller is a high-ranking official, not so much active anymore because he's kind of old, but when he was a younger man, high-ranking leader in the Council on Foreign Relations, head of the Chase Manhattan Bank, director of the Federal Reserve Bank in New York, and he was identified in Thomson Dye's 1979 book, Who's Running America, as the most powerful man in America. Obviously, in the Rockefeller dynasty, it was said, somebody had written in an article that David Rockefeller has so much power that he could get in his limousine and drive through every red light in New York and would not be stopped because of the power that he has. He was interested in furthering the goals of what they needed to do as time. There was there were certain things, goals that they had reached in places that they felt they needed to be as far as their goals for world government, and they weren't getting there. So they needed to do more to bring more people in to have a more expansive organization to try to facilitate their goals. One of the guys he brought in with him is Zbigniew Brzezinski. He was a professor at Columbia University and a Rockefeller advisor because he was a specialist on international affairs. That's who's pictured there. Henry Owen was another one who was a foreign policy studies director with the Brookings Institution. Brookings Institution, remember that name because people that come out of there have a one world government mindset. George S. Franklin, Rockefeller assistant, also a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. Robert Bowie, Foreign Policy Association, again, one of the groups that you need to keep in mind if you see that name. Anything they come up with as far as research and studies, obviously it's going to take a one world government slant. Gerald Smith was a SALT I negotiator. Marshall Hornblower. William Scranton, former governor of Pennsylvania, where I'm from. Edwin Reischauer was a Harvard professor. Max Constam of the European Policy Center. 1972, as Rockefeller, in the context of meetings he held through the Chase Manhattan Bank, had proposed an international commission of peace and prosperity to bring the best brains in the world to bear on the problems of the future and to be of help to government by providing measured judgment. Again, sounds real good, but you have to look at the underlying premise of the reason why he's saying it. Just like when you say world peace is good, the United Nations is working towards world peace. Everyone wants world peace. Different people say, well, what do you want most in the world? I want world peace. And it sounds real good on paper, but what are we giving up to have world peace? The Trilateral Commission was the name that this group actually became known by, not the original name he presented. But the Trilateral Commission represents a union of experts and transnational elite from the three non-communist industrial regions of the world, which is North America, Japan, and Western Europe. The first meeting was held at Rockefeller's compound in New York's Hudson Valley in July 1972. He basically has a literal compound up there of many homes and underground facilities and stuff. It is considered by some researchers to be an inner circle of the Council on Foreign Relations because, again, there's a heavy cross-membership between the Trilateral Commission and the Council on Foreign Relations, as it is with the Bilderbergers and with many other one-world groups. There's a heavy cross-membership. And when G. Gordon Liddy says that these groups are working for different goals, they're not, because there's a cross-membership, and that's what you need to look at, both of officers of companies that are in foundations that are providing financing for them. David Rockefeller said in a Saturday Evening Post article that the Trilateral Commission was a group of concerned citizens interested in fostering greater understanding and cooperation among international allies. Again, a soundbite, it's a propaganda statement. You look at the other end of it, Anthony Sutton wrote in the Trilateral Observer that they have rejected the U.S. Constitution and the democratic political process, and their objective is to have a one-world socialist government with them in control. Again, Barry Goldwater, Senator Goldwater, he was very much against the elite, and I mean, they didn't want him to be president. So in *64, when he ran, they really destroyed his chances to be president because of the commercial they ran with the bomb going off and trying to present him very much as a radical. He wrote, in my view, the Trilateral Commission represents a skillful, coordinated effort to seize control and consolidate the four centers of power: political, monetary, intellectual, ecclesiastical, a creation of a worldwide economic power superior to the political governments of the nation states involved, and as managers and creators of the system, they will rule the future. In other words, what they are driving, orchestrating, meshing, and gearing to accomplish is the New World Order, the one world government. You got to love him because he really wrote the truth. He came out with the truth, and a lot of people. He was very much considered radical, and as far as the Republican Party, he was almost an outcast because of how radical his views were. But I mean, he was definitely presenting truth. Fall 1973, James Earl Carter, governor of Georgia, was recruited to run for president. And I can remember I graduated in '75, and during that campaign, I mean, it was absolutely awesome to me that the campaign that was generated by the Carter people at that time. And obviously back then I didn't know everything that was going on behind the scenes, but it was just incredible. I remember going down to the campaign headquarters and they had pins and posters and position papers, and And compared to the other people that were running at the time, they didn't have any of that. So even at that age, I saw there was a lot of money behind this man. In the December 1975, 7 months before the Democratic National Convention, the Gallup poll indicated that only 4% of the country's Democrats wanted Jimmy Carter to be president. Nobody knew who Jimmy Carter was. The Atlantic Constitution, his own state, ran a headline which said, "Jimmy Carter running for what?" So within 6 months, the nomination was his because of the most elaborate media campaign in history. And I remember there was a song, "Why Not the Best?" Had some country guy singing it, and I mean, it was a great song, scenes of him walking through the fields and stuff like that. I mean, it was such an incredible media campaign to make him look like one of the people, to make him look like an outsider. And I mean, it was just amazing. Of course, before that, I really didn't take notice because I wasn't able to vote. But after that, I've not seen a campaign like that since then. It really is amazing. During his acceptance speech, after winning the nomination at the Democratic National Convention, Carter attacked the political and economic elite who have shaped decisions and never had to account for mistakes nor to suffer from injustice. This is the platform he ran on. He was the outsider. He was coming against the money brokers. He was coming against the people that he saw as running the country. Now, when he took the oath of office, he said that the United States will help direct a world order. Seems like a big change from a guy who was outside. Now he's inside. About 40% of the American trilateral members joined the Carter administration. In all, 291 members of the Trilateral Commission and the Council on Foreign Relations joined the Jimmy Carter administration. The man knew nothing. That his entire administration was run through advisors from these various organizations. He had no foreign policy experience, and actually the thing that what drew their attention to Jimmy Carter was, number one, they wanted to have somebody from the South run for president. They wanted to have somebody that had a Bible background because they felt they needed somebody with the religious that could come out from God and country. And they were also impressed that he had some foreign offices for the state of Georgia and other countries. So that's what impressed him and drew them. There was really nothing in his background that people would be able to see as being negative against his campaign. Craig Carpel wrote in the Penthouse article, Cartergate, The Death of Democracy, "It would be unfair to say that the Trilateral Commission dominates the Carter administration. The Trilateral Commission is the Carter administration." And he called them the closest thing possible to a board of directors of the world. So obviously the Jimmy Carter the Jimmy Carter administration was probably, he's actually began getting more respect for who he was after he was done being president. But during his presidency, it was a very poor presidency because a lot of things were done that really made him look bad. But morally speaking, everyone loved him, because of he taught Sunday school and stuff like that, and that was the thing about he was a very of high moral character, and that's what he was pushed when he was running. Among the people in the Trilateral Commission in the Bush administration, the current Bush administration, Richard Cheney, Vice President, Colin Powell, Secretary of State. Again, we see a cross membership. Those two are also members of the Council on Foreign Relations. Donald Rumsfeld, Secretary of Defense, is Trilateral Commission. As part of the political process, we began with looking at the political parties, and we began looking at how the influx of policy has changed, not within the political party system, but within organizations that are affecting the political process within the realms of the federal government. One of the things I want to show you is, and everyone's pretty much aware of the Electoral College because of the past election and how there was a fight with that, but we have in our country the Electoral College that was done through Constitutional Convention, which met in 1787. They felt that the normal guy in the street, the general public, lacked the insight and judgment necessary to elect the president of their country, which that kind of doesn't say much for us. So they felt that we could be easily misled by people who are running for president, and so they decided to have an electoral college to do the job for us. Basically, based on the population of the state, every state has a number of electoral votes. So basically, theoretically, is if a presidential candidate would win just 11 states, and the electoral votes that come with those states, they could become president. So there would be 271 electoral votes, and that would leave, that's what they would need to be elected, and that would leave 267 remaining votes in 39 states in the District of Columbia. And that will come into play here as to how important that is, because when the media is controlled, and just like the example with Howard Dean, I mean, he was knocked out of the box by the media. So the media, obviously, in the higher population centers and in these states here, you can see the media has a lot of control, and you can see how they can elect a president. Election of 1912, Democratic challenger was Woodrow Wilson. Republican candidate was actually the previous president, William Taft, running for re-election, and the progressive candidate was the 26th president, Theodore Roosevelt. And progressive, again, we can see where there's communistic leanings in we looked at the political chart, we can see the communistic leanings of the Progressive Party. In that election, 1912, Woodrow Wilson had 435 electoral votes. Taft had 8 electoral votes, and Roosevelt had 88 electoral votes. So we can see that third parties don't normally do that well in elections. So we can actually see where the third party candidate here actually beat the major party candidate. Out of the 13 states representing 266 electoral votes, Wilson needed to guarantee victory in 13 states, because obviously then the population is different, so there's a difference in how it is compared to today. So he needed victories in 13 states. He won 11 states, and he came real close in another one. He came within 4% in another state. So you can see how that the electoral college system was used via manipulating the media to elect Woodrow Wilson, and then on the other hand, with the remaining vote, they used a very charismatic man in Theodore Roosevelt to come against Taft and split that vote. Obviously, Roosevelt was Republican. You know, he was running under the Progressive Party. Taft was Republican, so that vote was split, and Woodrow Wilson was able to be elected. A lot of people say that was the same concept used when Bush ran for re-election in the early 90s, when Perot ran, that Perot was used to split the vote. So, again, back to this statement by Morpheus from The Matrix. You can feel it when you go to work. Federal Reserve Act, and I put that under the concept because of when you think of the concept of working, you think of the concept of making money, getting paid, and stuff like that. So I threw that in there. 1787, our new Constitution gave Congress the power to coin money and regulate the value thereof. Yet in 1790, Alexander Hamilton, Secretary of the Treasury for George Washington, favored a central bank, and in 1791, Washington signed it into law as the Bank of the United States. Alexander Hamilton actually is one of the founders of the Chase Bank, which became the Chase Manhattan Bank. So you have a connection there. Hamilton's elitist views and real purpose came to light when he wrote, "All communities divide themselves into the few and the many. The first are rich and well-born. The other, the mass of people, the people are turbulent and changing. They seldom judge or determine right." So here we have him saying that. We have in the Constitutional Convention where the people can't decide their own president, and it also goes back to what we talked about at the schools, where they had different schools where, you know, they had 3 groups of people, and they had a group of people, they couldn't decide what to do for themselves, so they had to do it for them. So you can see the same concept that runs through all these different avenues and how we're being manipulated. When Andrew Jackson ran for president in 1828, he said that with a central bank, power is exercised by a few over the political conduct of many by first acquiring that control over the labor and earnings of the great body of people. To a group of bankers, he said, "You are a den of vipers. I intend to root you out, and by the eternal God, I will root you out." In my studies, I found him to be a very exciting character, you know, because it was that, and that part of our history, that was the only time that we were completely out of debt. Now, there again, he was a Mason, you know, so there were still some things there. And there's a lot of things with Masons where there are Masons who are doing good things. There are Masons who are involved on just a very low level that are not aware of things that are going on higher levels. You know, so there's a situation you have to look at there, and also you have to look at where the Illuminati was, had infiltrated various lodges of the Masonry, and some of the lodges weren't. So you have some good men who were Masons And so Jackson, he vetoed the charter and abolished the bank in 1832. He ordered the Secretary of the Treasury to remove all government deposits from the U.S. banks and deposit them in state banks. And as I said, in January 8th, 1835, he paid off the final installment in our national debt. It was the only time in history that we actually, our national debt was lowered to zero. And in his biography, his biographer considered that the crowning achievement of his presidency, that because it's never happened, it didn't happen before that, it hasn't happened since. Because he realized the danger of what a central bank would do to our society and our nation and our country. One of the first men, and after that happened, the Illuminati realized they needed to more or less change their plans to again slowly infiltrate into the financial aspects of our country. And one of the guys that, the first guys that was sent to this country to do that was Paul Warburg. And he came out of the Rothschild Allied European banking family of M.M. Warburg and Company. Colonel Eli Garrison, he was a financial advisor to the presidents Roosevelt and Wilson. He wrote in his book, Roosevelt, Wilson, and the Federal Reserve Act, that Paul Warburg is the man who got the Federal Reserve Act together. And again, you're going to see here where we talked about how they have cover groups and to be able to hide things, front groups. And you're going to see a very similar situation with the Federal Reserve. It's appalling how this has been able to be put upon the American people. Very big name in the Illuminati, Jacob Schiff, with the financial backing of the Rothschilds. He came to the United States in 1873 and bought into the Kuhn-Loeb Partnership in New York. And we saw how with some of the financing behind the communist organization, how that financing came from Kuhn and Loeb. So that's a name you remember. There's a lot involved with that in New York City. He became a full partner in 1875 and became a millionaire by financing railroads. And he was the Illuminati liaison between the Rothschilds and the United States. Edward Mandell House, I alluded to him, he was the son of a British financier, Thomas W. House, who was a Rothschild agent. And he was the liaison between Schiff and Wilson. And Wilson wrote, "Mr. House is my second personality. He's my independent self. His thoughts and mine are one. If I were in his place, I would do just as he suggested. If anyone thinks he is reflecting my opinion by whatever action he takes, they are welcome to the conclusion." So there he is, Woodrow Wilson is banking everything on what Edward House is telling him. And House is getting his instructions from basically the Jacob Schiff, which is coming from the Rothschilds. So again, where people have weaknesses in regard to national policies, they are getting advice and they are getting counsel from people that have a one world government mindset. November 22nd, 1910, the financial and banking elite of the country met at the Jekyll Island Hunting Club. This was a small island off the coast of Georgia. At that time, it was said that no uninvited foot ever stepped foot on that island. And it was the rich, basically that was a getaway area for the rich. And it was said that when the men of the Jekyll Island Hunting Club sat down at the dinner table, that represented 1/6 of the world's wealth. Today, it's a tourist attraction. You can go there. You can see the remains of some of the houses, and some of them are still there, but some are falling down. Out of that meeting came two plans. There was a Plan A. And again, you can see where the cover-up will come here. Senator Nelson W. Aldrich, father-in-law of John D. Rockefeller Jr., was the most powerful man in Congress. A member of Congress for 40 years, 36 of them in the Senate, chairman of a powerful Senate Finance Committee, and he was the Illuminati representative in the Senate. That plan failed because it had Aldrich involved with it, and there was a reason why he was put in charge of it, because of the aura he had around him of who he was, and he was basically put there so people could look at him and say, "Well, I don't want that." He was connected with J.P. Morgan, who was one of the most powerful men in the country. It was actually said, because he was in that group along with Rockefeller and Carnegie, and they were basically identified as actually running the country because they were involved with their businesses and everything like that. They were in everything. I mean, and I believe I alluded to the fact that there was a dozen people who ran the country. So if they were involved in the country at that time, and publicly identified as so, they obviously have a major influx today in business. So like I said, because they get rolling little by little and infiltrate little by little. January 1913, Representative Carter Glass of Virginia, chairman of the Banking and Currency Committee, and H. Park Willis, who was the Dean of Political Science at George Washington University of the National Citizens League, began preparing the Glass Bill based on Plan B. Now, both of these plans were hammered out while they were on Jekyll Island, okay, because they knew what they were going to do. They had a cover-up plan and they had a replacement plan. So they came out with both plans because they were one was a cover. And they knew that this Plan B would succeed because they weren't going to use the term central bank. And in fact, it was Woodrow Wilson's idea to use the term Federal Reserve Banks. The bill was passed on December 23, 1913, and the Federal Reserve System was established on October 25, 1914, began operating 1915. And what this did was divide the country up into 12 federal regions. The gold and silver in the nation's vaults were now owned by the Federal Reserve. And basically it was at that time that the financial structure of this country was turned over to the international bankers. And remember, it was the stated goal of the Communist Manifesto to have a national bank. Representative Glass would later write, "I had never thought the federal bank system would prove such a failure. The country is in a state of irretrievable bankruptcy." 3 years later, Woodrow Wilson would say that all our activities are in the hands of a few men. It was discovered that there's people that have contacts that are able to get information, and there was one gentleman who printed a newsletter, and he found out some of the stockholders that were in the Federal Reserve. There's a couple of different lists. Some are public, some are not public. Some of the people who were on the confidential list were the Rothschild banks of London and Berlin, the Lazar Brothers banks of Paris, the Israel Moses Seif Bank of Italy, Warburg Bank of Hamburg and Amsterdam, Lehman Brothers Bank of New York, Kuhn and Loeb Company of New York, again we see that name, Chase Manhattan Bank of New York, where David Rockefeller is from, and Goldman Sachs of New York. One of the things I want to bring up at this point, and my publisher, when I was talking to him and he was proofreading the book, he got to the point where I was talking about the Federal Reserve, and I, for one, I'm sure probably most people here, believe that there was a conspiracy behind the assassination of President Kennedy. One of the things that, there was a lot of reasons given for the reason for his assassination, one of them being is he wanted to get rid of the Federal Reserve. And I had that in the book, and he was told by, one of the things that came out that money was issued at that time outside the bounds of the authority of the Federal Reserve. And I had that in the book, and it was a $2 bill and a $5 bill. And there was other bills in the planning stage that was then put aside then when Johnson came to I was going to say came to power, you might as well say that, when he became president. But he said that he was told by somebody who had wrote a book on the Federal Reserve that that's not true. I said, well, no, it is true, because I have a $2 bill and a $5 bill with me today that has United States note on and not the Federal Reserve. So that part is true. So I don't know, if anyone was ever told that. No, it is true. And he also wanted to do away with the CIA, and he also, there was a lot of things. Being a Democrat, he was very conservative in his fiscal policies, being a Democrat. So there was a lot of reasons behind it. But I did want to say, yes, there was non-Federal Reserve money circulated back at that time. 1933, Vice President John Garner, when referring to the international bankers, said, "You see, gentlemen, who owns the United States." Again, Barry Gold, what I wrote in his book with no apologies, does it not seem strange to you that these men just happen to be CFR and just happen to be on the board of the governors of the Federal Reserve that absolutely controls the money and interest rates of this great country, a privately owned organization which has absolutely nothing to do with the United States of America? Federal Reserve System has never been audited. They say they can't be audited because it would do away with their independent status of what they are. The minutes of their meetings are not made available. Their meetings are not open to public. They've repelled all attempts to be audited. In '67, Arthur Burns, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, said that an audit would threaten the independence of the Reserve. Again, John Rarick, good Mason, said the Federal Reserve is not an agency of the government. It is a private banking monopoly. Representative Wright Patman also came out very heavy and extensively against the Federal Reserve. He was the chairman of the House Banking Committee until 1975, said that in the United States we have, in effect, two governments. We have the duly constituted government, and then we have an independent, uncontrolled, and uncoordinated government in the Federal Reserve System. Henry Ford had said, "It is well enough that the people of the nation do not understand our banking and monetary system, for if they did, I believe there would be a revolution before tomorrow morning." And actually, with the way the interest keep it open, so there was kind of a division there. And on top of that, a gentleman by the name of Joseph Utzschneider, a lawyer, and three other professors at the college in Germany there, went to the Duke to inform them about what the Illuminati was doing. And the list of goals that he gave to them as far as what they were doing, and which was pretty astounding for how old the organization actually was at that time. And these 6 things that was given to the government was the abolition of the monarchy and all ordered government, abolition of private property, abolition of inheritance, abolition of patriotism, abolition of the family, through the abolition of marriage, all morality, and the institution of communal education for children, and the abolition of all religion. And that sort of goes along with the statement from the Matrix, and where the goals are, they sort of coincided. So I'm going to use kind of both of them as a premise to go into my talk. At the Third Masonic Congress in Frankfurt, the Illuminati goals were stated as pantheism, which is the worship of many gods for the higher degrees, and atheism for the lower degrees and the populace, and the communism of goods, women, and general concerns. And so what people down here are thinking and seeing are not what the people up here are thinking and seeing. And they're interested in the destruction of the church and all forms of Christianity, the removal of all existing human governments to make way for a universal republic in which the utopian ideas of a complete liberty from existing social, moral, and religious restraint, absolute equality, and social fraternity should reign. And the statement made by Morpheus, well, obviously this statement he said in the movie was written by the Wachowski brothers. And like I said, that exactly coincides with the 6 goals, and exactly coincides with the goals that have been fermented since since the 1776 when we started. The symbol that you see there is the symbol of the Illuminati, and it's also the astronomical symbol for the sun, and it's also used in literature by proofreaders as where commas need to be placed in manuscripts, and it's also a mathematical symbol for a circle. But being that it's the astronomical symbol for the sun, it was used by the Illuminati as part of their secret code. And I don't know, in the course of my research, I've read a lot of books, and there was a book a few years ago written by a very well-known Christian minister who had this symbol on the top of his book. It struck me as being very strange, and I actually called the publisher to ask why this symbol was put on the book, and the publisher assured me that everyone there was committed Christians, and that it was just an oversight, that it was what they call a dingbat. But whether it was a dingbat or not, I don't know, but when you get familiar with the symbols, when you get familiar with names of people, you start to notice things, and I sort of had something in the back of my mind about this book when I seen that symbol there. Of course, it could always be done by somebody who trying to make somebody look bad, so there's always that case there. But if you ever see this symbol anywhere, it's the symbol of the Illuminati. The first statement that I want to isolate as far as what Morpheus says in the movie is you can feel it when you go to church. And I'm going to sort of move into levels here, and I'll start moving very quickly once I get warmed up. But you've heard the Illuminati conspiracy has been referred to by many names. It's referred to as the Master Conspiracy. It's referred to as a Jewish conspiracy. It's referred to as a Anglo-Saxon conspiracy. I think first and foremost what we have to focus on, it is a satanic conspiracy, plain and simple. Ezekiel 28:12-18 talks about Lucifer and his beginnings and how he was the anointed cherub upon the holy mountain of God. a lot of people don't ascribe to the theory or the thought and the mindset of there being people on the earth before Adam. And I do. It fits together with a lot of things that are in the Bible and the time scheme of things. And I believe that there were people on Jeremiah 4:23-26 alludes to people being on the earth, and also various language within Genesis, in the very beginning of Genesis, alludes to people being on the earth before Adam. And I believe that Satan was the ruler of the earth at that time, and it was pride that caused him to want to exalt his throne above God, and because of that he fell, and his fall made the world as a wilderness. And I believe it did some things as far as this world, where the world had to be recreated and refurbished. And Revelations 12:4 talks about a third of the angels being involved in a war going against God. And there's actually geological evidence that points to a lot of catastrophic things that happened prior to our recorded history. And as a result of that, Satan is cast out of heaven. And of course, before that, he was Lucifer. After he was cast out, became known as Satan. Luke 10:18 says, Jesus said, I beheld Satan as lightning fall from heaven. We have Adam and Eve being brought on the earth. Adam and Eve was given domination of the earth. And this really upset Satan, because he felt he was still the head of the earth, that this was still his kingdom. And so it was his job to, in his mind, he needed to get back the earth. So that's why he deceived both of them, in order so he could stay and keep control of the earth. 2 Corinthians 4:4, Satan is called the god, little g, of this world. And to accomplish that, he will do nothing but steal, kill, and destroy. One of the things that an example I like to use in what Satan is doing today, and you can sort of correlate it with, I'm sure you've seen movies where somebody goes in to rob a bank and they kill somebody, and they got hostages in the bank, and you got 100 police out there, guns drawn, cars circling everything, and that man inside there who's done it has nothing to lose. So he's gonna do whatever he wants to. He's gonna kill people left and right, because he has nothing to lose. And that's what Satan is doing right now. He has nothing to lose. He knows the word better than most Christians, and he knows what his end is going to be. So what he's going to do is take as many people with him on the way to his end. And like I said, he does nothing but kill, steal, and destroy. It's like a monster movie. He does nothing but kill, steal, and destroy. And to do that, he lies, he deceives, and he manipulates. And I think what this presentation will do will give you a good idea and a good overview and the big picture of how this is happening. Religion was the first area that used to pull people away from God. Nimrod, in the Bible, he established the mystery religion in Babylon. At that time, people there were all of one tongue, were able to communicate as one people, and Nimrod built the Tower of Babel to reach unto heaven. And when God saw the intent and what was in their hearts, and the extent of the idolatry and how people were pulled away from God, he destroyed the tower and confounded their speech. And Genesis 10:25 says that this happened in the days of Peleg, which I sort of calculated that to be 2248 to 2009 BC. And it was at that time that the earth was divided. And at that point, after the separation of the people, I believe the ocean levels were risen at that time to basically have a physical separation for people, to pull them away from each other. After the death of Nimrod, his wife/mother Semiramis proclaimed him to be a god, and he became known as a sun god, and he was called Baal. And the sun god is nothing more than a representation of Satan. We alluded before as how Satan fell as lightning from the sky, and so there's the
The Prophecy Club, a nationwide television program, a nationwide radio program. The Prophecy Club also hosts approximately 40 major city meetings per month. Our mission is to inform Christians of current events that confirm Bible prophecy. Expose the evil devices of Satan. Warn believers what is coming to America. Challenge people to stop sinning and turn to Jesus with all their heart. And to provide a platform for Christian speakers to be heard.
It's a bald-faced lie.
Using the positions of power and authority in our own government.
The greatest oil field in the world is at the southwest end of the Dead Sea. He said, son, you must warn this nation.
And now your host for the Prophecy Club, Stan Johnson.
Welcome to the Prophecy Club, where we study and research Bible prophecy. Today's topic is a final warning, a history of the New World Order. Now, why in the world do we need to know about that? Well, Genesis 3:1 says, now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field. So we know that the devil comes very subtly. And a lot of times he attacks, and it's real easy not to notice the attack. You just see things falling apart. Revelation 13:1 and Daniel 7:23 both say we're coming to a world government. Revelation 13:1 says, and I stood upon the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns. I believe that that is 7 continents, the 7 continents of the earth, that they've divided up into 10 global regions. Each region has a leader, and upon his head is written the name of blasphemy. Daniel 7:23 says, the 4th beast shall be the 4th kingdom upon the earth. In other words, the world government. That's what it's talking about. Which shall be diverse from all kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, again, world government, and shall tread it down and break it in pieces. The Bible says that unless Jesus would return, no flesh would be saved. So we know that it's going to get that bad. And in introducing our speaker today, there was a recent movie that a lot of people just saw as just simple entertainment. But a lot of times what comes out of Hollywood is truth based upon fiction. Sometimes there's truth based upon fact. And in the movie The Matrix, Morpheus, a character, said, the Matrix is everywhere. It is all around us. Even now, it is in this very room. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth. Your speaker today says that this is an example of what is actually going on in the world today in regard to the influence that has been exerted by the New World Order to manipulate and to control your speaker says that we are not living in a real world, but in a matrix created by the God, little g, of this world. He's going to be talking about how our society as a whole was created and is created and controlled, how it is, and how education was hijacked and manipulated, how the media affects our day-to-day world, how news organizations control what we know, who is behind the influences and effects of TV, economy being manipulated, forcing both father and mother to work, weakening families, trickery that brought about the Federal Reserve, how income taxes were forced on us, mindset of the Social Security and social programs, how politics changed this country, and a whole lot more. Will you help me welcome our speaker, David Rivera.
Hi, my name is David Rivera, and the talk basically that I will be doing this morning will be coming from the book that I wrote, Final Warning, A History of the New World Order. And I guess the experience by virtue of me being up here comes from the fact that I've researched it for 25 years. Back in 1978, I heard a gentleman going around the country talking about the Illuminati, and needless to say, at that time I didn't believe a word that he said, but after a couple years of doing research, I discovered about 90% of what he said was pretty much true. And so I've been researching since then, and I think I've put together things in a way that you can understand it a little bit better. I've come from a different angle and a different perspective, I believe, that gives a more deeper understanding to the subject. The reason why I use the Matrix, and it's really strange because a couple years ago, I guess actually more than a couple years ago, back in 95 when the movie came out, shortly before then, the pastor of our church had preached a sermon that he felt like the men in the church should be getting rid of their action movies and not be going to watch R-rated movies. And needless to say, I went home that day and started going through all my movies, and you know, I had a pile here, and you would look at it, oh, I shouldn't have that, and look at this, oh, maybe I can keep that. And so basically all the men stopped going to the action movies, the R-rated movies, and then we had a minister shortly after that, a guest speaker. He came in and started talking about The Matrix, which was an R-rated movie. And I wasn't going to go see it, and the people in the church were very excited about what he was saying because he was giving a spiritual application to the movie, which I still was sort of blinded to seeing because I was just convinced, no, we can't be going to R-rated movie. You can't allow ourselves to be deceived to think that we could get some good out of a movie. And so I didn't rent it, and my wife had actually rented it a couple of times, and I wouldn't watch it. And so when it came on TV a few years after that, that is actually the first time that I actually sat down and watched it. I was just completely blown away by it. And as most of you probably know, it's a science fiction action movie made by Warner Brothers, and it is R-rated. And it's a secular movie, but and you shouldn't really confuse it with the two sequels that just came out the past year. The two sequels are just, it's junk. They sort of got away with the whole concept that they started out with. But the very first one is one, if you haven't seen it, you need to go out and rent it. One of the, early in the movie when the character Neo goes and speaks to Morpheus at the Lafayette Hotel, he sits him down and he says this to him: do you want to know what it is? The Matrix is everywhere. It is all around us. Even now in this very room, you can see it when you look out your window or when you turn on your television. You can feel it when you go to work, when you go to church, when you pay your taxes. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth. And when I heard that paragraph, it just blew me away because there was so much truth wrapped up in that small paragraph. And so when we started when I started thinking about the concept of putting a presentation for this video, I really felt that that would be a good launching point because just the whole concept of the movie itself really kind of explains how I think we're living in the world today that's run by an elite that we have no idea what's going on behind the scenes. And one of the things that really blew me away was on the internet I found the actual original script for the movie itself. And in the original script, they talk about the Matrix being a euphemism for the government. They talk about the Matrix being a system controlling our lives. And they talk about, in reference to Big Brother and the New World Order. And so they've taken that out of the movie because they didn't want any of that kind of political overtones to the movie and didn't want it to appear conspiratorial. And the concept basically is the character Thomas Anderson, who is a.k.a. Neo because he's a computer hacker, played by Keanu Reeves. The movie opens up and he's in his own world doing his own thing and stuff like that. But what he's actually doing, he's actually laying comatose in a pod where his mind, images fed into his mind to make him believe he's in a real world, yet he's actually feeding a civilization of machines that are actually running the world. So that's the basic concept. And Morpheus tells him later on, after all this is revealed to him, that what is the Matrix? It's control. The Matrix is a computer-generated dream world built to keep us under control in order to change a human being into this. And we've been referred to in the writings of the Club of Rome as useless eaters. And we're made to service the world for the people that run the world. In our lives right now, we go out day in and day out, we work, we go to church, we do different things, and we don't think about the things that are actually being done, how the government is and we get a little bit of inkling because of us going to war in Iraq, so we can sort of see the way things are manipulated to get our country to do things like we haven't found weapons of mass destruction yet. We went there because of that reason. So there's a kind of a small idea of the things that are done to manipulate us into being able to do things. But there's many, many things like this that are done behind the scenes that we don't know about because we're busy. There's so many things that are dominating our lives. And even though technology is supposed to make our lives easier and better, the technology has made us want to do more, and we're so consumed with living our lives, we can't really pay attention to the things that are going on behind the scenes. The Illuminati itself is, I believe, the organization that is fueling the New World Order, and though they are not called the Illuminati today, we go back to that as the roots of where this organization started, and the man who is highlighted as starting it is a man named Adam Weishaupt. He was a Jesuit priest and a professor of law in Germany, and he was the man that was handpicked by the Rothschilds to lead and develop the Illuminati. Rothschilds being the most powerful family in the world, and you don't really hear a lot about them, but over in Europe you do hear more about them than you do here. He was very much involved in the occult, studied the philosophies of the Manichaeans, astrology, medicine, magic, the Egyptian occult practices, and various other occult-oriented things, and he was rumored to be a Satanist. I found this on the internet. I thought it was very interesting. It is his family crest, and it's really interesting that his family crest had a black goat's head on it. Now, I had kind of trouble. You'll see there's some lines there because I had trouble. The place that I got this from didn't want me to download it, so I had to download it in pieces. But a black goat's head obviously is a satanic symbol, so you can more or less see where the family line is oriented from. The organization itself is launched in May 1st, 1776, and was known as the Ancient Illuminated Seers of Bavaria, and became known as the Order of the Illuminati. And the name was derived from the Luciferian teachings of being holders of the light. And the name of Lucifer itself means the bearer of light. By 1783, kind of got a slow start, had about 600 members. One of the gentlemen that got involved with it was a man named Baron Franz Nigg. And he was a lawyer and basically was an organizational genius. And he got them all kind of a single aim and a single goal, kind of got them together where they could more or less concentrate on things, do more recruiting to get the kind of people they needed to do the things they wanted for their goals. He later quit because of Adam Weishaupt was basically not running it the way he felt it should run, and one wanted to keep it secret, one wanted to